Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to the Community Development Transportation Committee meeting for November 20th, 2019. The purpose of the committee meetings are for the city departments to pass along information to the city council and discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of the city council, and the city administrator. The ordinance mandates the city administrator as the chair of the committee meetings. By ordinance, the committee makes no formal decisions on committee matters. Rather, items are voted to move to the mayor council meeting for consideration and vote, or staff receives guidance from the committee regarding a matter. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, we do not take public comments or questions during the committee meetings. Public comments or questions are received at the regular council meetings held at 7 p.m. in the city council chambers on the second and fourth Monday of each month. First item on today's agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for October 30th, 2019. Is there a motion? Motion to approve by Councilmember Palermo. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Tizer. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Moving on to community development, we're going to move item number 5 up to the first position. Item number 4 to the first position. Consideration of a text amendment to Unified Development Code Section 12.5, Stormwater Management, and 13.2 and 13.14, Administration. Ms. Romberg.
Thank you. So the purpose of this section of the ordinance for stormwater management is very wordy, so bear with me for just a second, but there's a couple of things in here that I think are very important to set the stage for the discussion that we want to have with you today. The purpose is to protect, maintain, and enhance the public health, safety, environment, and general welfare by establishing minimum requirements and procedures to control the adverse effects of increased post-development stormwater runoff. And it's been determined as a result of a lot of work that's been done, and this is largely related to the Georgia Stormwater Management Manual that was established and adopted with the most recent update in 2016, that proper management of post-development stormwater runoff will minimize damage to both public and private property, infrastructure, as well as safeguard the public health, safety, environment, and general welfare of the public, and protect water and aquatic resources. And what this is referring to is over time, as even small developments add up, the immediate impact is felt by the neighbor, and then the next neighbor, and the next neighbor, and then it's cumulative. And so that's what we want to talk with you a little bit about today. Just real quickly, this ordinance applies to all land development unless it's exempt, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But just so that you're aware, it's any new or redevelopment that creates more than 5,000 square feet of impervious hard surface. This would be concrete, decks, roofs, anything like that. Land disturbance over an acre. There also are some hotspot land uses such as a gas station and some other areas that the city engineer has some direction over being able to identify requiring some stormwater compliance. Common developments, this is going to be subdivisions, and the reason this is included is that the individual home may not qualify under this, but the whole new development does. And so we look at it as the development, not as those individual houses coming in at a later date. And then for non-residential properties, so for commercial properties, the difference is there's a lower threshold that when you're at 1,000 square feet, water quality component of stormwater is required to be complied with. And just to explain that a little bit, water quality looks at what it sounds like, the quality of the water, does some water cleaning basically before it leaves the property. Detention holds the water for a longer period of time and releases it at a slower rate so that you have less impact to the downstream properties. Detention is what is triggered at the 5,000 square feet and water quality, but the 1,000 is just water quality. So the exemptions that I mentioned, there are currently 4 in the ordinance. Single family or 2 single family lots that are not part of a subdivision. The definition of a subdivision is any property that has been divided into more than one. So even a lot that has been subdivided from 1 into 2 qualifies as a subdivision by definition in our ordinance and will be subject to this ordinance. And then of course, what you think of as a subdivision, Roswell Farms, Martin's Landing, that's a subdivision as well. But this particular property right here, focusing this, then you're going to start to see some tree removal, just spotty here and there. And then you'll see some development in this corner and in this corner. And really start to get a sense of what we're being faced with when it comes to some of these smaller residential properties. That over time, you start adding driveways that were not paved before and now they are. And then you add another half circle to your driveway. And then you do a little bit more, and maybe a little bit more, and then, oh, I need to park an extra car in my backyard, so I've added that. And then, and you'll see over, this was all trees in front of here, there were a few others in this area, I think there were a few over in this area. And then you get to 2018, and they also decided they need to have a pool in their backyard, and then these houses have been demoed. This was 2 houses before, now we've got these 2. This house, which is a little more obvious in this image here, and so this particular area happens to all drain, these lots all drain to this area here, and it goes this way and through here, under the road, through a detention pond, and off to a pretty good-sized stream system. And there have been reports, nothing major, of over time there being issues with standing water in places like this because of just the rain events that we've had. So to give you a little bit better sense of what we're looking at, these are the building footprints that would be classified as what we call build to get through this house, to get through. So here's another example. This pool here is just over 1,000 square feet. It's a pool and a patio area. And so this area is an additional area of impervious surface because the water can't drain through it that does change how downstream properties would behave when it comes to stormwater runoff. So what we're looking at is some proposed changes to try and mitigate this. We get a lot of complaints from individual property owners who feel that downstream impact. And so for a few years now, we've been talking about what are some changes we can make, what are our neighbors doing that we can learn from, which I also will present to you as well. So the biggest thing we'd like to talk about is right here where it says non-residential, is that actually being removed, and water quality would be required for all properties when they are over 1,000 square feet of impervious surface. And then the detention would still not be required until 5,000, which is the same as it is today. The second piece of this is to look at the exemptions, and these top 2 that I said that we want to talk about today. We're looking at eliminating those, but what we're looking at doing is replacing them with a couple of things because we do have some cases where it just doesn't make sense for us to require stormwater. For example, if someone just purely wants to replace their existing driveway because it's cracked, it maybe has settled, it does that over time, it really doesn't make sense for us to require them to comply with the water quality component of the stormwater ordinance. Same thing with modifications to ADA compliance. We run into this a lot where ADA is provided, say, at a McDonald's, but the standards have changed. And so to make that adjustment technically as a replacement of impervious surface, but it's 1 for 1. It is not making any major difference to the overall runoff, and they already have usually a stormwater component. So to make them do a bunch of modifications just to comply with the federal law doesn't make a lot of sense. And the last is sidewalk improvements to comply with section 11.14.16. So this is the situation where it's an existing street and they may need to build some sidewalk or improve the sidewalk. That typically drains towards the roadway, so we're not asking them to accommodate that on their property from a stormwater component in that kind of existing situation. That is a little bit different when it's a brand new development. If I have a brand new subdivision coming in, building roads and sidewalks and new houses, they actually create a stormwater, water quality and detention system that does address all of that new impervious. So this would be specific to existing houses. Some comparisons that I want to go over with you before we start talking about some of these numbers. What we're recommending is exactly what the city of Alpharetta currently does. They do trigger water quality for impervious area equal to or greater than 1,000 square feet. They do require detention when it is equal to or greater than 5,000 square feet. They have the same land disturbance at an acre hotspots. They have the same exemptions that we've talked about.
When you say the same exemptions, do you mean the same current exemptions or your proposed exemptions?
The same current exemptions. Basically, and this is a great segue to this, the model ordinance that is used by this region, everybody follows it, so they all look exactly the same. There's just some minor differences where based on properties and site conditions within their jurisdiction, they've made some changes, which is why Sandy Springs will make a little bit more sense. Alpharetta doesn't necessarily have the same tight infill type situations that we do as often as we do. Sandy Springs is similar, except for the fact that they require for any impervious area over 1,000 square feet, you have to comply with the ordinance. And theirs, instead of an acre of disturbance, is 5,000 square feet of disturbance. This is just land disturbance. You're required to comply with the stormwater ordinance. They do have a lot of exemptions that they provide. Some are very similar to the ones that we're recommending. Some, in my personal opinion, make no sense to do, but it's because of this land disturbance at 5,000 square feet that they've got to conclude a bunch of these other ones, which we are not recommending. And then City of Atlanta is even more stringent. The creation of any impervious area requires you to consider the stormwater ordinance. In redevelopment, it's 500 square feet. And even if you demo a bunch of impervious area, but you leave 500 square feet in the area that you're working, you have to comply with stormwater unless it's already being addressed on the property. So we're not at all recommending that we go somewhere this extreme. They have an even harder issue than we do because their entire city is impervious. They have a ton of exemptions as well, which I won't bother going through, but it's because of their very small square footage that they recommend. Other just real quick changes that we're also including at the same time with the change in the square footage is clearly the biggest thing that we'd like to talk with you about. For ordinance administration and enforcement authority, under the 3 articles that are sections that are listed above, currently the public works director is given that authority, and that was reflective of the staffing at the time in 2015, or even just before that when this was written. But under our current practices, the community development department and the engineering division through the land development process, the city engineer and the engineering director are actually the ones making those choices and decisions on the ordinance administration. So that's a recommendation to change that to engineering director. There is still an interface with public works because the maintenance, which is post-construction, would be still enforced and maintained. The enforcement of that would be under the public works department just because it's under maintenance. 2 other quick things under inspection and maintenance agreements. There was some discussion in the language about the city taking over long-term maintenance responsibility for private stormwater management facilities. We do not do that. Our current practice does not do that. And so we want to remove that language to be consistent with our current practice because it is a little confusing. It's misleading. The intent was not for the city to take those over, but the way the language is, it has come up as a point of contention of that we should be, but we will not be doing that. And then the last thing is under the water quality section, the Georgia Stormwater Management Manual has a reference to what we call runoff reduction, and we do enforce it, but it doesn't say it specifically in our ordinance that we do. The way the manual is written, it's up to the local jurisdiction on whether they do or not, and so this is basically just to make that revision so that we comply with their recommendation on the technical code, which is the runoff reduction, which is just a part of the calculation, is all it is. And so with that, I want to open it up to discussion, and I can go back to any of these slides that you need me to.
So I have a few comments. So first off, I really do appreciate staff bringing this to our attention because I do know that a lot of existing homeowners and existing residents do really express a lot of frustration with some of the negative impacts of 2,500, something along those lines. I do think it should be lower than 5,000, but I want to consider it being a little higher than 1,000. I'd like us to consider that change, or I would like us to consider a change where we have an exception for additions to single-family homes. So I'd like us to consider one of those 2 adjustments, or perhaps a combination of those 2 adjustments. But again, overall, I definitely want to make sure we do see something like this move forward.
And just there are 2 exemptions that we had talked about getting rid of, just to respond to Councilman Palermo. There were 2. One is to take off the blanket exemption for single-family lots that are outside of a subdivision, but the other was additions to existing attached or detached houses. That certainly could be just left in there. I'm going to go to the square footages for you real quick, just to give you, back that far, a sense of those numbers. So that the 1,000 square feet is typically, we're looking at something like this, and this is a pool and a bunch of patio area. For example, these houses are just over 2,000 square feet. So you're looking at, in order for this one, for example, to come as an addition, they would pretty much have to add 50% of their house size on there to end up requiring it, which you and I talked about. That's a pretty substantial size addition. But those are just 2 ways to look at it, that certainly leaving that on there, but then looking at that square footage and seeing how that needs to play out.
I have a couple of questions. Does topography play a role here? Because I didn't see anything about topography or any consideration of topography.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes. So one of the things, and if I miss something, Danelle, you can jump in and add in or correct me. Every single land disturbance permit application that comes through engineering, our stormwater plan reviewer will check to see if it needs to comply with the ordinance, and then they work case by case on those very specific properties. Suppose when we have properties due to the types of soils they have, maybe it's really rocky, it won't infiltrate. So even if we did ask them to do some practices that require, let's say, water quality, they won't physically function. We're not going to ask them to spend money doing something that won't work. That property would be basically exempt by default because of those conditions.
Okay.
I can give you a quick example. Let's say somebody has a house and they want to, and they're up against a creek buffer, but it's downhill going toward the creek. So the road is up here, their house is here, the creek and the creek buffer's here. The water would have to go downhill, but if they have to get into the buffer to do that, then we wouldn't require them to do that. So it is literally a case-by-case basis to try to make each of these, to make sense on that property, what will work the best to make it for the long-term, easy maintenance, and features that work.
Okay. And the second part of my question was, we talk about 1,000 or 5,000. There's any percentage regarding the lot size? Because if it's 1,000 in a 50 acres, it's one thing. If it's 1,000 in 1/8 of an acre, it's a different story. So there is any relationship with the lot size and the coverage?
There's not. Where that gets picked up right now, and that's something that we have been talking about, seeing if there's a way that we can address it. Right now, the only thing we have in the code that has any discussion about that is about building coverage, which is going to be just the roofed structures that you see in purple-ish on here. So driveways, sidewalks, and pools currently don't get classified in here. These are RS-12, I believe, lots, and so in the code, the building coverage is the maximum allowed 35%, I believe. So I do have some questions about one of them, but I'll talk about later, Jackie, when I was running these numbers. And so right now, that's the only control we have is over how much roofed structure can go. And so an RS9 is 45%, RS12 is 35%, the RS30 is 25%. So the bigger lots have less coverage they can do based on the building size, with the understanding that those smaller lots, to be able to put anything usable in there, is going to have to be a little bit bigger, and that's why we've got that. So right now, they are looked at separately, not necessarily together. We have talked about finding a way to look at a maximum impervious area on a property. No one else is really doing that right now, because what they do instead is they say, if you want to add, you have to treat it. If you want to add more, you have to treat it as well. And so it looks at it on a smaller level of each time they want to add on to it, not looking at what that maximum is. So right now today, you could literally, like this property here, if they wanted to come back in, they could pave all of this grass, a little bit of grass, they could pave all of that and there's nothing in our code that says you can't.
So it shouldn't be only the roof, but everything that is like pool, driveway,
That is
parking.
a way, that is possibly a way that we can do it. I think, and this may be a separate conversation we would have with legal and any other jurisdictions that are doing those types of measurements, because I think then you start getting into more of the property right side of things, and basically telling someone they can't put a patio in because they've reached a maximum impervious, as opposed to, if you want to do it, you need to pay the extra cost of treating that water. So you're giving them that option, because there's also different materials they can use. For example, if they did a pervious paver system that has a gravel bed under it, it basically treats itself. So it's not considered new impervious because it's taking care of itself. But that's a little bit more expensive construction than just putting a concrete slab down. So it's a cost benefit of figuring out, you want to be able to make the best use of the property you have, but what's also the best use for our environment, for our city long term, and for our creek quality, and looking at it as a higher level big picture. So I think it should be part of the conversation. I just would not necessarily think we could come up with a percentage or a square footage based on lot size, because of those kinds of issues that we may run into.
Thank you.
Is it possible to provide some sort of, I guess, requirement, suggestion, incentive to use a pervious surface in certain situations? Like I can see, when you're adding a driveway or a patio around
Right.
a pool, it would make so much more sense to do that. So is there a way to incent residents to do that?
We do have, I don't know if it would 100% apply to this, but we actually have some credits available through the stormwater fees that are assessed. And I don't remember the exact details, but I know we've pulled them up before because we've had folks who wanted to do water quality or detention on their property even though they weren't required to. And so it could lead towards them getting a credit towards some of those fees. And I don't remember how the numbers break out, so it's certainly something that could be considered. And again, that's one of the things that Donnell has actually made some changes to the way previous engineers have reviewed some of these. Pervious pavers in and of themselves is a hard surface. And so a lot of folks just want to they think if you put a paver down, the water can kind of go through the cracks. Same thing with a deck. They think, oh, it goes through the cracks, so that's a pervious surface. I'm like, no, it's a hard surface that's changing the pattern of how the water runs. And so for the pavers, because you do this gravel bed and it's a special kind of construction that goes under it, it does literally give space for the water to go and hold for a moment before it starts to infiltrate down into the ground. And so it is considered a treatment of itself if it's done correctly. It can be done incorrectly and you don't get as much credit for it. Maybe you get 50% credit for it because you don't do enough volume underneath it. And so we've played around with that a little bit when we've worked with homeowners to try and come up with what is the right solution for them to be able to get what they want to do.
Right.
When they're kind of stuck in a situation where they're required to comply with this today because it was a lot that was divided into two. And so we try to, looking at the size of the lot. I mean, clearly if you've got a very small lot, you don't have a place to put infiltration practices because you have to be so far away from the property line and so far away from the house and so far away from this. And so it starts to all of a sudden you're like, all right, well, you can put something this big on your property. Well, what's the point of that? We're going to find other things we can do.
Sure.
Other recommendations that we would say, let's try some other things that make more sense for what you're trying to do.
Right.
So I think there's some options. I don't know if the way that the ordinance is currently written for the stormwater part of it, that it specifically calls out and says, hey, if you do other things, you're going to get this. It's really more of when it's available when you overdo what you need to do above and beyond your requirements.
Right, sure.
So using the house in the middle with the pool and the multiple driveways,
Yes.
the way you're proposing the ordinance today, the new ordinance, at 1,000 square feet, what would they have had to do? Had they come in and said, we want to do this with our driveway and our pool?
Right. So if that had been in place,
So you're at 1,000 square feet.
Right. So I'm going to go back to this one. So on this one, this was basically their driveway before, but it was a dirt surface. It might have been a bit of some concrete going on in there. So when they did this construction, I probably would have been in the same view as Donnell is today, is that it's already hard packed, they're already driving on it, they're just putting a different surface there to be code compliant. So we probably would have said, we're not going to require anything for that. This area here, when they added this, two things would have come into play. Can they do it at all? Because technically our code doesn't allow it today. But the other would be that this area, maybe we asked them to do this impervious pavers. Maybe we asked them to put a little rain garden over here so the water flows off of the driveway into this little depressed area where they can do some plantings and stuff, and before it leaves the property and infiltrates in. And then fast forward, this is where it really became an issue, is, and this little driveway here, that's not 1,000 square feet. It's probably about 250, 400. It's a parking space. It's not very big. And we probably would have said, you're okay, we're not going to worry about it. But then when you get to the pool, patio area, and all the other things that they do, now everything from this property line, there's a shed right here. There's about a 10-foot gap between the shed and this property line. That's where all the drainage goes through from all of these properties, goes right through here to make its way into this is the culvert that goes through here. And so everything here is now impervious. And so this would have triggered the requirement for them to do something. However, where would they put it? What would we do? We would have to have taken a really hard look at what can we get them to do to help compensate for this. When they first came in to do this, it was the same time this lot line was being moved, and I think this one was being moved weirdly too. And I believe it was this property owner, I may have my memory wrong, had serious reservations about all this that was going on because what they were seeing largely due to the work that was being done in this backyard, is it was funneling all the water into a tighter space because of what they had done, and it was getting here faster, and it couldn't get through this pipe, and so it was backing up. And so we run into a problem of, what could we make them do? This is already so tight, where you downhill would want to put something, because you don't want to make them pump the water to someplace. How could we make them do that? And so that's when we start taking a look at options of, okay, well, let's get all your roof drains into something that you can put up here to treat that water so that it basically becomes a wash. The fact that you've added this can be compensated by taking care of slowing down the drainage of this water into another location. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what we would have gone through from like a conceptual design.
Yeah, what I was trying to do was pressure test whether 1,000 or 2,000 made sense.
Okay.
And also understand what type of options there are. You know, when you
Right.
start talking about the impervious paver driveway system with 36 inches of gravel underneath, that gets, you know, pretty prohibitively expensive. When you talk about changing your roof drains to move into a rain garden in the front, that's a much simpler solution. So what I was trying to determine was, where would they have triggered the need to do that at 1,000 or 2,000, right?
Can I give you some?
Please.
Okay, so to treat 1,000 square feet, so that would be, you could do that in a trench that was about 3 feet deep by about 3 feet wide by about 20 feet long.
Okay, that's very helpful.
That's one way to do it. And with the driveway systems, usually when you see a really deep driveway system, it's not just treating itself. I think the minimum for cars to be, on a paver driveway system, the minimum from a structural standpoint, I think is 12 inches. So when you see something deeper, that means it's treating the rest of the site. So let's say we could wind the clock back, and we knew ultimately that these folks wanted to have a large paved area and a pool and this big driveway. If we could, and I know that it didn't happen that way, but let's just say we knew that that was their goal back in 2010. The area behind their house, between the pool and the house, that could have been a large paver system. And I think everything could drain there, or does drain there right now. So that area could have been the soil treatment area for for all of that. And it would receive water from the house, but the house, anyway, whether or not, it could have been designed to treat the whole property. So just to give you a sense, the infiltration practices, and we have pretty good soils in Roswell, they work well here, and we have hundreds and hundreds of them.
Sure. So there are reasonably inexpensive solutions for a lot of this, whether we're at 1,000 or 2,000. And I think you're suggesting 2,000 as a way to sneak up or get closer to solving the problem without going all the way down to the most restrictive.
Exactly, and I have a proposal for this committee for you to consider, so I strongly believe we have to move forward with something that improves the water quality, which staff is proposing, but I do, and so I don't want to see this really kicked down too far, but I'd like to propose deferring this to the December 10th committee meeting, and expecting there that we'll have something that we're ready to vote on and move forward to council from that December 10th meeting. Would this committee support that, or does the committee prefer to hash this out today? So I guess I'll put out a motion, see if it fails or not. So I motion to move this to the December 10th committee meeting.
Second.
Motion to move to December 10th committee meeting, seconded. Any further discussion, questions?
So, yeah, I mean, sorry.
I guess my question is, what do we need to resolve between now and December?
I thought with all the questions, I was thinking I was hearing some uncertainty, or I want your support in moving this forward, and if you're not 100% there yet,
Plus, we're missing 2 elected officials.
we don't need this.
We don't need legally, but we need an opinion to know what they think about it.
We're going to have that on a lot of issues today. If the 2,000 is a little less restrictive, but gives us the reason I think I like the 2,000 is it doesn't interfere with building a pool, right? Which is probably a more common thing that goes on. But it's hard for us to determine just what we just created.
So then am I hearing that you'd support moving this forward with 2,000?
Frankly, I'm fine either way.
So, and again, I think that, 1,000, 2,000 is direct related to the lot side. Because, again, if you are talking about 2,000 and you have 3,000 or 2,500 square foot lot, then you don't have a space to create options to absorb the water before going to your neighbor. So, I think should be somehow a relationship with the lot side. I don't know what it is, but I think because 2,000, 1,000 really, if it's a small lot side, is a lot. Because they don't have space to resolve the issues that create to the neighbors.
I would agree with that comment as well. I think, you can see what happens where one action today, it kind of cascades and has a depending on the lot size. So if there's any way to factor that into the consideration, that would be great.
We could certainly look into that. I am, in all the searching I have done, have never found any other jurisdiction who's done it that way. So we could be leaders.
Right.
I think you get into we can take a look at it and see. I'm not sure how we can, because even though we have lot size by zoning, they don't always comply with it. So for example, those are all RS12, but look at the difference between that lot and that lot. So there's a lot of those types of situations that come into play, which would make doing it by lot size a little more complicated. But we can see what we can come up with. So that was a question I want to ask, is that for the December 10th meeting, what additional examples or information or suggestions are you looking to see from us?
Well, definitely the possibility to contemplate the lot side or not.
Okay.
At least, let's get more
Here's the thing.
information about it.
Okay.
The thing on lot size, so we're really talking about the amount of water that you're moving, right? And so if the lot size is smaller, you're moving less water. So I don't know that lot size is going to matter as much. My concern is more, I only want to trigger this when I need to trigger it. So it sounds like that we're not at a point where we are all in agreement.
Would it
so-
be helpful to have some sense of, like, we could look at the decks that we have gotten in the past several months, to have a sense of how many of those decks were more than 1,000 square feet? Or how many pools are more than 1,000 square feet? Would that be helpful to have that kind of information?
Or
And
to
how many
council,
would be more than 2,000 square feet?
or to council member Zapata's question, how many were on little tiny lots where it wouldn't work and how many were on sort of the average size? So a little bit of data, I think, would help us get there.
Okay.
What is the thing that's going to trigger the incremental building up of a situation like that? How can we?
I can tell you that most decks, most pools, most additions are smaller than 1,000 square feet. It's when you have a deck, a pool, and an addition.
In the sport court.
Yeah, that's when it, because 1,000 square feet is about maybe 35 by 35 or so. And that would be, if you think about the size of most pools, they're less than that. And decks are certainly a lot less than that, almost always.
So we have a motion and a second for deferring to the 10th.
Any further questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Unanimous. Moving on to item number 2, proposed text amendment changes to Unified Development Code due to the adoption of the Historic District Master Plan.
So before staff gets started, I just want to make a comment on this and actually have to head out for another meeting. But so first of all, I want to thank really all the citizens as well as staff working so hard on putting this together. I think this is a great achievement. I know it was a lot of work. And so as I've gone through everything and reviewed it with staff, I absolutely am a big supporter of this and getting these text amendments in there. There's one aspect that I do want to address, and I hope you'll discuss today. There were a handful of situations in the historic district master plan where it still shows as 0-foot setbacks, and some of them are because there's already a building there with a 0-foot setback. So I think that makes sense. It's grandfathered in. There's a building there, and the fact that is it PVC?
Protected view zone?
Yeah, the PVZ, that addresses those as well. There were very few, and I know of one for sure, there might have been a few more than one, where there's a 0-foot setback, and my guess is the justification is south of there's 0-foot setbacks. The difference is the fact that south of there's wider sidewalks, there's room for outdoor seating, there's room for walking, whereas in having a 0-foot setback and just a 5-foot sidewalk, then that's something that definitely gives me concern, and I want to make sure we address ahead of time, because with Vickers, granted Vickers was 3 stories, and I feel out of character and would not be compliant under the Historic District Master Plan going forward, but it still had wider sidewalks, whereas if it had 5-foot sidewalks, it would seem even more intense. So that's the one thing that I ask that this committee look at is for those few 0-foot setbacks where there's not already an existing building there, just to make sure that we're looking at and addressing, because again, I do think, even though it's my understanding that sidewalks, I believe, were not covered in the Historic District Master Plan, I think it's very relevant, because the ones that exist and do complement the character have those wider sidewalks and frankly shorter, most of them being shorter buildings than allowed there. So that's what I want to bring up. That's something that stuck out to me. But overall, I think this is a fantastic master plan, and really appreciate all the work that went into it from both citizens as well as staff.
So, sorry, before you leave, one question mainly for you, I guess. If we require wider sidewalks, would be a solution for no setback?
I think that would be a possible solution. So for example, thank you. So you see the 0, and then there's the 0 with the white below, so with the West Alley. Those all have a wider sidewalk, which I feel complement the 0-foot setback, versus having the 0 up there where they would just be 5-foot sidewalks. I feel that would really be encroaching onto the street, onto the character, et cetera. So I think a possible solution is slightly increasing the setback. I think a different possible solution is keeping a 0-foot setback, but requiring a wider sidewalk, similar to more south.
Okay. Or both, I think.
Exactly, either or. But again, thank you all for the time.
Thank you.
Well, we can start from here if you like, or we can go back. Basically, the plan here and the text amendment changes. Everything in this slideshow I have for you is very similar to the work session that we had back in October. So basically, it's just going through every different step. As you can see currently, this is what we have in the code today. And what we're changing here is adding in the master plan. So you'll have a new 8.2.4 section, which is the regulating plan. It's a zoning control. It's going to establish all the setbacks that we just talked about with Councilmember Palermo, and it'll establish the 40-foot wooded landscape strip along parts of State Route 9. And then if the regulating plan does not apply, the underlining zoning will apply on that property. So here's the regulating map. This is the zoomed in area. So we'll talk about this since Councilmember Palermo, we discussed this the other day. 0 setback. There are a few places in the city that have a 0. There are about 7. Julie and I looked it up on Monday. This is the old antique store. It's the Peachtree Salvage location at the moment. Right now it shows a 0, and he is right. It shows 0 because of the properties to the south. Currently, where the buildings exist all the way up at the street have a 0-foot setback because they are existing. So proposed, it has a 0-foot setback. However, when you go through, there are options that the HPC would have to establish and move something further. They do have that authority. There's no BTZ. This text amendment will remove the build-to zone. So that means even though there might be a 0 on the setback area, it doesn't mean that we don't have the option to say, we want you to move this back 10 feet or 20 feet. Okay, and then this also has the protected view zone, which we'll get into. So in the protected view zone, there's a 40 on the front along Canton and a 25 on Webb, which means in that protected view zone, they can only do 2 stories. And then outside of that, they can go up to 3. So they cannot get 3 stories on the street. Secondly, something when he was talking, let's say somebody comes through the process and has to go to council because maybe they want to do multifamily or townhomes or something like that. This is zoned, what is this, DX? Yeah, DS. Okay, well, never mind on DS, but let's say they want to do multifamily. If they have to go, and they have to go through a process for multifamily, then that would give everybody an option to say, you know what? We have 6-foot, 7-foot sidewalks along south. We can make that a condition of the zoning if it goes through a process. If it doesn't go through a process, then obviously it has a 5-foot sidewalk right now. However, I spoke with transportation on Monday, and technically this area could be 6. That would be the section. I think I'm right on that. So right now it has a 5, and if triggered, if this is ever redeveloped and it goes just through the process to do retail, office, whatever they might choose to do, it would be required to do a 6-foot sidewalk. So this is just a zoomed in area showing you the regulating plan. These are all the setbacks that are listed. A lot of the zeros that you have are existing buildings. There are a few properties, as I stated, that do not have a building on them. This is another area showing Magnolia and Atlanta Street. Here's Mimosa area, and I believe one of the areas on Mimosa does have a 0-foot setback. However, it has an existing building on the site. You can see that that one right there where Mimosa and Park Square is. Some of them have sidewalk, and most of them are between 5 and 8 feet. This is the area along Atlanta Street going down towards the river, showing that section. So basically then, as I stated, the regulating plan establishes the primary and side street setbacks. And then where there is no setback, and there's no maximum. So that gives people the authority to move it back. So if you go up to, let's go back to this one. So let's take the one that has a 20 on the front there where it has a 10 on the side. If you want it to be, the property next to it has a 40 because there's an existing structure on it. If by chance somebody says, you know what, we want this building to sit back where that building does next door at the 40, they have the authority to do that. There's no build-to zone that says you have to do it 20. That's just set by the regulating plan. So the Historic Preservation Commission has the authority, but once this is adopted, to be able to move that around. The landscape strip is being established. That's the 40-foot landscape strip along portions of State Route 9. As you can see, that's in section H5. Here's a map showing that. It is on both sides, but the other side of the street is the National Park, and I don't see us developing the National Park Service area. So there would be a 40-foot landscape strip along this side from Warm Springs Circle south, and that's the only portion that is on. And these are the specific requirements related to native overstory and native understory trees, and then the requirements for the planting of the trees if this was ever redeveloped. And as you know, this area is mainly apartments. So if somebody came in the future and wanted to redevelop it, they'd be required to keep the 40-foot landscape strip and then also have a protected view zone. So now we're getting into the protected view zone. So the next section here is the chart related to that. So each of the regulating character areas that's listed on the chart, based on the map, have a protected view zone. And then in each section, some of them have a max of 2 stories, and other areas have a facade width that you saw with the Hill Street plan that they have to meet. So, and then if they're not in the protected view zone, their max is 3 stories. Or per the UDC, some properties we do have 4 stories on the map. So what we've done here is we've got some, I'll show you some, let's see, we have some examples. Okay, Mimosa and Bullock. So these examples show the setback, which is the hatched area. The blue is the protected view zone. So within that area, you have, let's take the one down here under Bullock Avenue and Marietta Highway. You have a setback of 40 feet, and then you have a protected view zone. So you can only build in the blue up to 2 stories, Anything outside of that, in that tiny gray square area, you could go up to 3. But that would be what somebody would get on their property. And Councilmember Tizer, you had a question at the work session, and Julie and I spoke with the consultant and looked at everything. You wanted to know if there was any properties there'd be a taking, and based on the regulating map that they did and what we've looked at, no. Every property would still be able to develop, but some of them might just be a little bit smaller and everything, but yes, they can still develop. This is an example here, South Atlanta Street. So as you can see, the green is the 40-foot wooded strip, then the blue is the protected view zone. So along that side where the apartments are, they'd have the 40-foot and then wooded area, and then they'd have the protected view zone. So they could build 2 stories in the blue area and then 3 after that. Here's the property that we were talking about earlier that has the 0. So you have the 0 setback. However, they can only do 2 stories in the blue area, which is the protected view zone. So you cannot get 3 stories on the street. So with the protected view zone, you do save that area. Now, as I stated, that still doesn't mean you can't ask for the setback to be further back. And we can always write that in if that's something that the committee would like us to do. So then we have the facade, the different sections of the facades along the street here. When the facades are located in a single building, at grade open space with a minimum width of 10 feet and a minimum depth of 30 is provided between the adjacent facades. And here's an example of that. This is a picture showing that. As you can see, there's a depth. Now, this might not actually be 10 feet. That could be 20, but our code shows 10 feet. So you would see buildings sit like this. The Hill Street plan that was approved used this portion of the master plan when they developed their property. And this is the step back. So when all stories are above the second, must be set back at least 10 feet behind the street facing facade. So here's a picture showing that area as it goes up and then it goes back. That's what a step back would mean. Here's another example of a step back. So you can see the portions in the back are higher, but they've stepped back from the front area of the buildings. And then when a PVZ contains portions of 2 or more buildings, one in front and one in the rear, the requirement of 1 foot above does not apply to the facades at the rear that are fully screened by the front. So if they're not fully screened by the front, then they have a step back. So, but this picture shows how it's fully screened. If you're standing like on the sidewalk area, the brick sidewalk, and you're looking at the front house, you can't see that house in the back. However, if it's above it, then if somebody wanted to develop that today, they would have a step back if it went above and you could see it from the front. Then we just have the normal sections in the text amendment that the neighborhood compatibility bulk plans still apply, and the conditional use permits and C of A. So if somebody's going through the process, the applicants, when they're going through for a conditional use or maybe a rezoning in the historic district, they have to demonstrate the conformance with the master plan. They still have to go through for the C of A, and it's required per section 13.7 of the UDC. This is the alternative compliance section. This is the portion that allows the Historic Preservation Commission a little bit of leeway on projects, and it's not a variance. They have the authority to review and approve alternatives to the master plan. So these next sections indicate what they can do. They can modify the setback requirements. So as I stated, they can modify those. So they don't have to leave it at 0. They have the opportunity based on the alternative compliance to move that back if they choose to do so. The only thing they can't touch is the 40-foot wooded landscape. You can't modify that. It's 40 feet. It cannot be reduced to 20. They can increase the allowed printable building height as long as it doesn't exceed the limits required by the UDC. So the city council is the only one who can, if there's an opportunity where they can go from 3 stories to 4, that's a conditional use and that's only granted by council. But if the front area has a 2-story and they actually like the development and they want to give something in the protected view zone, maybe 3, they have that option. That's the only place where they can modify. They can reduce or eliminate the step back requirement.
They can permit a building type along streets that's not found on an officially designated historic building in that character area. So if you take, let's say, Canton Street, and a lot of those are single-story shop front, commercial houses, building types, and if somebody wanted to do a different type of building, they have the authority to say you can. But they might also say, no, we want to keep the commercial house type that's in this area or the single-story shop front. And they can increase the maximum allowed facade width in the protected view zone. So currently in the protected view zone, you can have 80 feet, but they might say, you know what, we wanted to give you 100 because of the way this building looks, it's how it's designed and everything like that. And then, as I stated, they cannot use it for the 40-foot wooded landscape strip. However, there are criteria in order to approve it. So they must have these, the applicant must show how they meet these requirements in order for the staff to grant that and also for the HPC. They have to have compelling reasons why the standard can't be met. The design must satisfy the intent of the district. The design must satisfy the approval criteria for a certificate of appropriateness. It must demonstrate exceptional conformance with the guidelines that are in our code now. They must conform with the comp plan and the master plan. And any appeals to alternative compliance follow the same route. So if somebody comes in and asks for that, staff says no and HPC says no, but they can still appeal that decision to mayor and council. That authority has not been taken away. And then it would be up to you whether or not you want to uphold that decision or say, you know what, we like this design, we're going to allow this, you need to go back to the HPC with this design. And then they would have to follow that requirement. Then this section in the code is going to be removed and replaced entirely. This is just the downtown house section showing that. Basically, this is exactly how it's read currently in the code. It's downtown areas. Be amended to add the new subsection. So it's a relationship. The historic district established setback, building type, and other form standards that differ from the standards of Article 5. And then those standards would apply. So basically, all it's saying is if it's different in Article 5, the standards in Article 8 will apply because that's related to the master plan. Anything related in there will have to meet the Article 8. And then the building types are being deleted and then the new ones are being inserted. So you guys also approved the cottage court in the DX and the DH. So all these building types are allowed. And the only difference is the cottage court. So the only change in that is the cottage court one that was approved a couple months back, sometime this summer. And then the biggest portion also is the removal of the build-to zone. This text amendment will remove all that section in the code currently, so there'll be no build-to zone in the entire historic district. Any questions?
Yes. So I want to thank the committee and the consultant that we used on this. They did a tremendous amount of work to get here. And frankly, this thing's sort of brilliant in its simplicity. It's so simple that it's hard to understand. You all did a tremendous job in your explanation for how this all works in the work session. And I might suggest that you grab that video and maybe hold it, hold in the website somewhere so that people who want to understand what they can and cannot do can just watch that. When you start talking about protected view zones and all that sort of thing, it gets a little bit difficult to understand, but your explanation was really insightful. And so the other thing I'd like to say is before I know the committee made a lot of trade-offs, things that some people liked, things that some people didn't like, to get to the solutions that they came up with. And certainly for me, there are things I like and things I don't like, but taken as a whole, this provides the kind of protection that we were looking for and a balance between protection and renewal. So I'm not keen on making small changes to it without hearing back from either the consultant or the committee as to whether it's okay or not. I do like the fact that HPC can make some of the changes that we're talking about. So I'd like to move this forward, and I'll make that motion to move this project forward when either now or when the time's ready. So
I have a comment.
Why don't we go ahead and capture that motion now to move forward? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Floor is open.
Thank you. So, good question. What concerned to me is like, let's just take an example, Canton Street, not the first block, but going north. Most of those, except maybe for Vickers, has a setback today, correct?
Yes.
So, this is a perfect example that you just passed. Perfect, great. So, north of Norcross, most property has these setbacks. So, I would like to clarify, in the future, they can build a 2-story building right next to the sidewalk?
No.
They will have to respect the
Yes.
current
Okay, so,
exactly setback as a minimum setback.
yes, see if I
Okay,
can
just want to
find-
clarify that,
I don't know if I have one from this section. It's hard to read on this map. This is why I zoomed in on some of those. I don't know if I captured it.
One shows it even though it's not Kansas.
The Green Street one?
There's
Well, so
some.
some of those, okay, so some of those, as you see the setback where it says like 45 or 30? So the setback's going right up to the house. And you can see at the top, it says 50 feet up there on one of them. So if there's a structure that's existing, and let's say it's sitting back at 40 or 45 feet, then that's the setback. And then after that is the protected view zone. So technically, maybe it'd be better if I got up.
point with the
Yeah,
laser.
Laser, okay, that's good. So let's use this one, it's 50 feet. So what that means is that's a setback of 50. So if anybody else wanted to build, let's say they wanted to build on that next to it somehow, they'd have to watch the setback, and then they have a 40-foot protected view zone where they can only do 2 stories, but they would have to be back here. So they'd have to go another 40 feet. Now, I don't know how wide that building is. Maybe that would sit right here, but you have to protect the setback. So each property is given a setback, and most of those all have buildings on them, don't they?
Yes.
So then they technically are wherever that building starts. So let's say some of them are 30, some are 45, some of them might be 50, some of them, that yellow house, I'm not sure what that yellow one was, where it is, but they have that setback already established by this map. And once this map is officially adopted, it's part of the text amendment, so it'll be set. So nobody would be able to build in front of that.
In other words, will be respected exactly the same setbacks that they have, the building has today.
Correct.
Correct.
If they build-
Exclusive of the porch. They didn't include the porch, which is how the UDC does it. It's pretty much the front of the building facade. The porches can encroach somewhat, so.
Yeah.
They didn't count the porch. So in this one, they might have gone up to that front of the building.
Okay.
So this could be, I don't know, what's this, probably about, I'm guessing 30 feet maybe? So think of it that way, okay?
Okay,
That's what this map will establish.
good. So back to the specific example that Councilmember Palermo gave on the corner
Sure.
of Canton.
Well, we'll use this. It was the other one. Right here.
This one. So they're on the corner.
Of
let's say
Canton and
10,
Webb. Oh, the 10 one up there?
10, and then will be 30, you have 30, 45, 50 going north on the left. And then if you go, it's 10, and I don't see on Canton Street.
So the one that's,
Let me point.
I
you one
think
again.
I think I know which one are you talking about? This one right here?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so that looks like it's 30 feet.
Okay.
Because it matches that building right there, it goes across. So that looks like that's 30, and this is 10 because it's a side street.
Okay. Because probably today the building is way back, right?
Yes, this actually is way back here. I don't know if there's anything up here right now since it's not shown on there.
Right, just parking probably.
Oh, maybe
The only
parking in the back.
buildings shown on the regulating
Oh, that's
plan
right,
are
yeah.
those that are designated historic. So for example, the one with zeros, we all know that the antique store is there, but it's not shown because it's not a historic structure. So the footprint of that building is not on this regulating plan.
Okay, so
There
that
there
would
is
be
a building on
zero.
that lot,
Yes,
on the 10-foot there that you're talking
Yeah,
about.
there's probably a
Councilman.
building
There's a lot
sitting right about
of Linen
here.
and flax is there.
yes, that's correct, yes.
So that would be 0, even though the right next north, going north, has 20?
Yes.
Is how I read? And what is this?
I believe they put that 0 on there based on right here
But it's the other
to
side of
match
the street.
this. Mhm. And across the street.
So I don't know why it's not matching the north property right next to this property on the north, which is 20.
Well, that's 20 based on the building that's sitting there.
Right. Is what I'm saying, it's on the same block.
Yes, it is.
So why not to respect the same block instead of across the street or down the street? You know,
We
how
can
go-
put that in,
I
and
believe,
Yeah.
if you,
So-
I believe the thought was on that particular lot is that it's probably one of the few parcels that has some redevelopment potential.
Correct.
That if it's redeveloped, it would be in character with what's there, which would be the shop front. And the HPC members are nodding with me, so.
What is?
okay, so shop
Be in
front,
character
If you
with
look
the-
north, it's different.
Shop front is
Really
here.
have-
But if the antique, the lot for the antique mall is, from HPC, that is more in character with what's across. They want it to be more in character what's across the street and what's south, so that you could kind of almost recreate a Candy Street type of vibe there.
compared to what's
I mean,
north.
what's north of it is
Commercial
multifamily
houses.
and residential townhomes.
So can we then specify minimum required for sidewalk there? Because again, what happens south is they like to put tables on the sidewalk, and then it's already narrow sidewalk, and then you create problems for pedestrian. You know, if you, like we always say, we not compare with Alpharetta. You know, if you go the barbecue place on Highway 9, it's probably 14 feet sidewalk. So what happened there, the restaurant has tables outside, very nice, and then you still have a lot of space for either walk around or stay with people talking. So again, if it's gonna be 0 setback, I will like to see a good sized sidewalk for either in the future restaurants to have tables on the sidewalk, or, you know, and pedestrian have a comfortable size sidewalk to walk around and meet people and hang out there. So, you know, 0 setback with, what is it, 5 to 6?
Right now, it's 5, and if anybody redevelops it, at this point in time, it would be 6.
Okay, so if you add tables outside, then you really have no much to walk the pedestrians. So on this particular case, I don't know if it's other case around this master plan that is this case, I would like to see a wider sidewalk on this 0 setback proposed here on the master plan.
Okay. You know,
So just
Can look
thinking
into
ahead,
that.
you know, thinking ahead, because you said this property you just mentioned, this property have a potential redevelopment. So we have a one shot to get it right, and in terms of, you know, setback and sidewalk, especially sidewalk.
text amendment hasn't been written,
Okay.
or it's in draft form, so if we want to add that in, this is the time to do it.
Okay, I don't know if you could identify other cases on this.
Well, we identified 7 possible items that have the 0 setback for Councilmember Palermo.
Okay.
So we can take a look at those. Some of those won't work with a really wide sidewalk based on where they're located,
Okay,
but we can take a look at those before we get to the next step.
great, thank you.
So-
Jackie, on this, what you could look at is what was in Roswell about the intersection, where we had the
Yes.
plaza, you know,
The plaza section, yeah, we'll take a look at that.
So we have a motion on the floor to approve to move forward.
Hold on, just.
With a second, is there any further questions?
So this particular piece of property, I'm going to speak with just a little bit of authority since my home is contiguous to this piece of property. And I appreciate Mr. Savada's concern for it. I'd really like to get the thought from the committee as to why they did it this way without adding a minimum sidewalk width to it. For this particular piece of property, for the other 6 pieces of property, again, I'm concerned about beginning to pick things apart that they've given so much thought to. So I can be supportive of a minimum sidewalk width on this particular piece of property, but I want to understand the whats and whys of the committee and why they chose to do it the way they did it.
And I think one of the beautiful things about this plan is that it allows HPC to consider each piece of property and its relationship to the entire district and to its neighboring property. So I think it's such a great creative solution. Again, thank you all for pulling it together.
I just raised a point that I want to make. So you said that the applicant can appeal HPC decision?
Oh, yeah, they can do that now.
Okay. And can council appeal HPC decision?
No.
Okay, thank you.
This is for initiation, right?
This is for a vote to get to initiation.
Right, that's,
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
that's what we're
Thank you,
moving
Bob.
forward. So we got a long process where you will be able to work all these things out, because you got initiation, then you've got planning commission, and then it gets to council in 2 readings. So, you've got a long way where you can work all of these out very well.
Thank you, Bob. Let's call the vote.
Motion to approve. All in favor, please raise your hands. Unanimous, thank you. Item number 3, consideration of a text amendment to the Unified Development Code, Article 10.3, signs.
Okay, so we brought this to you last month, and you asked us to look at a few things, and we did. A couple things were, you wanted to see some photos of the 9 square foot and the 32 square foot signage, because we were looking at changing the 9 square feet to allow 32 square feet or 18 square feet. So we have some pictures here. So currently, the DS downtown shopfront has a 9 square foot max sign area. So this is a 9 square foot sign. Here it is closer, serendipity on the square, but this is 9 square feet. This one is 96 square feet. This is 17 square feet. This is 3.2 square feet. That's a close-up shot of that. So we wanted to show you what, you had asked to take some pictures, you wanted to see what they looked like. So that's what those are. So this first one, that's a 9 square foot sign. Here it is from the parking lot area. So we're hoping that we may be able to move this portion forward. The second part, Councilmember Judy asked us to take crown signs to the HPC. We were looking at adding a crown sign to the section in the downtown mixed-use districts. The HPC on their meeting on the 13th said no. They were not in support of adding a crown sign to the historic district sections. So I didn't know whether or not you wanted to continue to move that portion forward. If you do, we can. If not, we can remove that portion out of the text amendment and only take a text amendment that has the DS change, which would be from 9 square feet to the 18 and the 32. And that's basically what you had asked from last month. So I didn't know what you wanted to, if you had any questions or anything. What we were hoping to do was still move the crown sign, but if you say no, we will not move that portion forward.
I would support HBC's recommendation in the historic district.
All right. Well, then what we'll do is if you make a motion, the only portion we would move forward, if you're acceptable with that, is the portion related to changing the DS from 9 square feet to 32 square feet for buildings with a store frontage of more than 30 feet. All other buildings may have a wall sign of 18. That would be the only change. And that's the text amendment.
Okay. And these measurements are like a proportion of the facade of the building? That is the
Sort of.
philosophy behind that, like make it proportional?
So we don't do it just like that. So you saw the Rock and Taco building. So this is 17 square feet. This has about what, almost 200 feet?
Very wide.
It's very wide, it's very long. Unfortunately, it's based on the zoning, not really based on the building. This area is zoned downtown shopfront. They only get 9 square feet. The reason they have a 17 is because the building prior to that, which was Besties, had a 17 square foot sign here, so we allowed them to do the same. The most this could get, if you approve that, would be 32 square feet. We don't do it based on, the linear portion at this section in the width.
Which is going to be, just to have an idea, double what we see here? Roughly double
So
what
it'd
we-
just be under double what
Yeah,
you see
just
there,
under, yeah.
just under.
It's a 4x8 sign.
Yes, it'd be 4 by 8, if approved to 32.
When a story or a story and a half up is a very small sign.
Right, it is. So yes, if you look at, like I said, the serendipity, that's a 3 by 3 sign. 9 square feet. It's not that big. So I didn't know if you wanted to move this forward or not
Without the crown,
without the crown.
yeah, okay, motion to move forward without the crown.
Motion to move forward without the crown by Councilmember Zapata. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Wilsey. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. Thank you. Item number 4, consideration of the mayor and/or city administrator to award a contract to Pond for the development of the 2040 comprehensive plan in the amount of $230,000.
5, right? Number 5.
5, I'm sorry.
Yes, the committee met. We have put out our bid for the 2040 comprehensive plan. We received 4 bids for this. The committee reviewed it, and the committee consisted of myself, Alice, 2 other members from Planning and Zoning, member from Park, Recreation Parks, and Transportation representative, plus our finance representative. So after the review of all the applications that we received and bids, the committee selected Pond to be the consultant. We would like to move this forward to the December 9th agenda for your approval.
Floor is open.
So I see there were other 3 offerors that were not recommended.
Yes.
What can you tell us about the other 3?
So the one on the bottom, the Calvin Giordorna and Associates, they're out of Florida. They're not local. They've never done a comprehensive plan here. We wanted somebody who has experience of doing a comprehensive plan. So that one was, pretty much a unanimous decision by everybody related to being off the table. The other 3 were somewhat close. We looked at all the different factors that they had, and then we all met and discussed it, and we felt that Pond would deliver the best of what we're looking for the comprehensive plan.
Based
As
on-
you may or may not know, when we do a bid process, everyone on the committee goes in and they do a rating independent of any discussions with other committee members. And basically just from that rating, before we had a discussion, it came, basically Pond was the chosen.
The main
Well, the
class
main thing,
of Pond was,
they've done work for the city. In fact, you're probably going to hear from them a little bit later. They've done work for the city. They worked previously with the city on comprehensive plan and other plans. In fact, they did the last comprehensive plan. They also did the East-West Alley master plan. They presented a very, I won't say aggressive, but a very creative approach to doing a comprehensive plan. They're very familiar with the state regulation. And so we just felt that for the city, unanimously from all the committee members, was Pond should be the chosen consultant. And they're within budget. They're all within budget.
thank you.
Motion to move forward.
Motion to approve to move forward by Councilmember Wilsey. Is there a second? Second. Second by Councilmember Tizer. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to transportation. We're going to do item number 10 first, consideration to adopt the City of Roswell bicycle and pedestrian master plan. Is that correct, Mohammed? We're doing that one first? Gentlemen.
Well, good morning. I just want to start off by saying Pond was also our consultant for the bike ped plan. They've also done a tremendous job, and we're happy they're here today, and we're wrapping up the bike ped plan, and we're going to give you an update on it. Just to give you a recap, this is the third time we've presented this to you. We presented this to the mayor and council back at the August committee meeting, and you guys saw all this material 3 weeks ago at the work session. So basically, nothing you're going to see here today is nothing you haven't already seen. So I'm going to just take a few moments, a very brief recap of our outreach program, our data analysis, prioritization, how we came to our conclusions, and then talk about our next steps. And ultimately, our goal is for the mayor and council to hopefully recommend this to our December 9th council meeting for final adoption. The study goals were basically to dust off our policies and practices, compare them to regional and national trends to make sure if there's anything that we may need to improve on. We can talk about those items. Talk about refinements to our sidewalk matrix that gets a lot of attention. It's something the mayor and council approved about 4 or 5 years ago. We wanted to make sure there's anything we can do to improve that and how selections are made, because we get a lot of comments from the citizens on that. Also, to identify our needs and prioritize our investments over the next 30 years, and basically develop realistic solutions that are financially feasible over that horizon. To recap our public outreach, we had a stakeholder committee with 10 citizens from all over the city. We had members of Bike Roswell on the committee. We had 4 public meetings in May and again in September, where we had meetings in East Roswell, North Roswell here in this room at City Hall. We're also very proud of the online survey, which we showed you guys a bunch of screenshots of 3 weeks ago. We had almost 500 survey respondents, and they had almost 1,000 pin placements, which I'll show you on a map here in a minute. The really cool thing we did was our tactical engagement. We went out to public events like Alive in Roswell or Roswell Moves, but more importantly, we went out and talked with just folks at parks or at MARTA bus stops or random places that citizens who aren't normally engaged. You know, we have a lot of people come to our public meetings, but we wanted to reach out to folks that are not normally engaged with city activities. So we went out to various places like the dog park at Lita Thompson Park or on the boardwalk, as you see here, to get feedback. And we also had a great outreach program to our Spanish-speaking population, where we went out and had some of our surveyors interview people and get their input who normally wouldn't give us feedback. I mentioned the pins on those surveys. We did that large electronic survey. The main thing I want to point out here is notice where the pins are clustered. I'm going to come back to that in just a few moments. These are a couple examples of the screenshots we had of places people want to walk and bike to, and also where they think pedestrian concerns are. And you'll notice they're grouped in some pretty obvious areas, and I'm going to show you a map of how we kind of put all this together at the end. The technical analysis was very intense. We had a great foundation. We took all of our data from census data, population, demographics, the ability of users. We looked at, geographical trends we looked at populations that don't have access to vehicles. We had probably almost 20 different survey points that fed into this. And then this is what was the foundation of our data that we basically went out to the public and got their input and then started building upon that. And you've seen probably about 10 of these different maps. I'm not going to go into all those items, but I just wanted to kind of refresh your memory from a few weeks ago. One of the key things that came out of this, and this is something that I think we spent a little time on at the work session, I just want to remind you of, is one thing this study will do is look at the Roswell Loop system that was adopted in 2006. It's a tentative list of corridors that we could do bike and ped improvements on. It was over 40 miles in length, but to date we've only built about 6 miles. So one thing the study is going to recommend is a potential replacement to this system, and we wanted to make sure you guys are on board with that. We had some good feedback 3 weeks ago. But this is basically, we're calling it the hub and spoke system. We'll probably come up with a better branding name as we move forward. But remember those maps I showed you with all the pins and those little cluster areas of activity? Those hubs, those green circles there kind of indicate where those were. Obviously downtown and Canton Street, the 400 node, there's going to be a lot of activity there moving forward in Big Creek Park. The east side, over near Centennial High School, and East Roswell Park, as long as the west side at the Roswell High School and Oleta Thompson Park, and up near Sweet Apple and kind of the entrance to Milton there. This was a lot of public feedback fed this. These are kind of how these were developed. A lot of it's kind of the same, which I'm going to show in a second here, but this was basically driven by public input. And to give you kind of a summary of what would be changing, this is the map we showed you before. The black lines are on the loop today, basically here on Bowen and Jones and up to the north and on Coleman and Willio here. Those would fall off if this were to be approved, but the red dotted sections would be added, completing it along Woodstock and King by the high school. Pine Grove Road, we had a lot of feedback from citizens coming to get to Canton Street, and also connecting along Holcomb Bridge up on the east side. So the benefit of this is it gives us more of a focus area over the next 30 years. The key thing was if this was approved, we'd be reducing our system down to about 26 miles. That'd be about a 25% reduction in what we need to finish. That would probably be more feasible over the next 30 years, given our our pace, our resources. So this is something we would want the study to look at and possibly replace our loop system if you guys approve it. Regarding the other improvements, all the maps you guys saw, and I have copies here and they're in your packet, so if we want to talk about them, I'll show you in a moment. These had about 65 planned projects over the 30 years, and we broke them up into 3 tiers. They're financially constrained. So based on our anticipated revenues, we forecasted those out over the next 30 years, and YOE is year of expenditure. We applied inflation rates, not only to our revenue, but to our project cost. So a lot of these are in the future year dollars, not in today's dollars. So we try to get these in somewhat realistic pieces that we could actually accomplish over a 30-year period. We also have a lot of projects that we think they're needs, they're important. We have another that is over $100 million or $118 million that we are still considering. They could be accelerated in the future, but we just want to make sure we're tracking those as part of the plan. I'm not going to go through all these projects, but these are just the different buckets or tiers. This is the short term over the next 10 years. The main projects I just wanted to draw to your attention, obviously the Big Creek Parkway is on there that has multi-use paths and bike lanes. The Riverside Complete Street project, basically from Highway 9 over to 400 and Old Alabama is on there. That's also bike lanes and multi-use path. We also have a key connection down here at Willio, the bridge in the Cobb County to connect our boardwalk to their trail system. We're also recommending an extension of the hardscrabble multi-use path from King, where it terminates now, over towards Target and Olivia Thompson Park, along with a few other recommendations. I'll be glad to go through any of these in more detail, but this is the Tier 2. We have a good mix around the central core of Roswell and East Roswell, including Riverside Road down towards Eves is on there. We also have a trail connection between 120 and the boardwalk here. This is one we spend a lot of time on. We're working with Fulton County to see if we can cut through their water plant. But there's a bunch of different recommendations we could talk about. And lastly, Tier 3. These are still important, but they didn't rank as high in our scoring or with our public input. So we can talk about these as we go forward. Here's a list of all of them put together. You can see they're highly concentrated in the central part of the city, but we do have quite a few recommendations in the different parts of town, east and west. And then lastly, this is our aspirations plan. These are the projects that are outside the 30-year window, but we're still looking at them as possible needs, and they could be brought into a plan or a future plan at a later date. The other things we're going to talk about real quickly, we're almost done, is the policies that the plan is recommending. And the most important thing I want to say about this slide is if we adopt this plan, these are not binding. These are just recommendations that staff will bring back to you at a later date for implementation. We're looking at our trail system. Do we want to do some new branding or wayfinding options? We talked about maybe some public-private partnerships if we do trails. So we want to have like trail sponsors that maybe offset some of our maintenance cost. One thing that was really important for us was to look at the regional connections. ARC, the regional planning agency, has a very big bike ped plan, Walk, Bike, Thrive, that they did a few years ago. This mirrors there. We kind of started our plan based off some of their recommendations and goals. And also we wanted to make sure we're looking at the regional trail network. They have some that not only connect to Cobb County and the Silver Comet Trail, but also the Path 400 corridor you may have heard about down in Buckhead Sandy Springs is implementing a piece of it now. So we want to make sure our plan covers that regional connectivity between the Big Creek Greenway to now Alpharetta and into Sandy Springs, maybe connecting to our new Chattahoochee River pedestrian bridge. We also want to look at safety things. We want to possibly come back and implement a Vision Zero policy, which looks at crash data that involves bike and pedestrian, make sure that we can set some goals for that. We also are doing some new maintenance practices. We talked about this at the work session a few weeks ago. Possibly when we do our regular repaving program for our roads and our maintenance, we maybe narrow the travel lanes for vehicles and add 6 to 12 inches of bike shoulder. This was mainly looking at on some of the uphill sections. We've heard our bike community has talked about if we can widen bike shoulders on the uphill portions, that helps them tremendously as they're slowing down, as they're trying to pedal up those hills. That keeps them out of the travel lane and there's less of a conflict with vehicle traffic. We also have a whole batch of sidewalk recommendations for our matrix. That's how we recommend and prioritize sidewalk programs for our budget process. There's a bunch of recommendations we're going to be looking at there. And again, we bring those back to you at a later date, most likely in the spring. And also the plan accomplishes a list of projects or priorities if we ever get a new funding source or a reoccurring funding source, such as a new T-SPLOST in a couple years, or if there's a bond list that ever comes up. We could use this to generate projects for a list. So in closing, the staff will recommend that the council approve this. We'd like to request that you put it on the December 9th Mayor and Council meeting for adoption. And I welcome any questions or anything about the projects that we have shown you in the past.
Floor is open.
I've heard there's some concerns by the bike community with what with what you're recommending today. Can you help us understand what that might be?
Do you have any more specifics on what the concerns were? I'm not sure what the concerns might be. We're recommending several miles of bike lanes along some of our projects, including Riverside and Big Creek Parkway. I've personally spoke to the Bike Roswell president a month ago about the repaving of the shoulder widths. I think the mayor may have had a couple comments at the work session. We have their support in widening those bike shoulders when we do our basic repaving program. One thing I didn't mention is one of our recommendations that for our maintenance program is better maintenance of our existing bike lanes. We've heard some complaints from the bike community that why don't you ride in bike lanes? Well, because there's debris. If we have a storm or during the autumn, there's a bunch of debris in the bike lanes. So one of our recommendations is to increase our street sweeping maintenance of those lanes, like maybe on Riverside or Azalea or on Old Alabama, to help better clean debris of our existing assets. That was another recommendation we came back with. But one thing we focused on, and there's been some disagreement, is multi-use paths. This plan has a lot of multi-use paths, and you can put bikes on those. If you look at the state law, cyclists are not supposed to ride on a standard sidewalk, 5-foot narrow sidewalk. Multi-use paths, they are allowed to be on that. Some of the concerns the bike community has had is, they want to be on-road cyclists. They want bike lanes on the pavement. They appreciate the multi-use paths. They appreciate being able to ride on the sidewalks if they're with their children. But if they're road riders, they have had some questions about, more bike lanes. Another concern that they raised early on in the process was trails that are, off-system that may not be on existing roads, whether they be on alternative alignments, whether they be kind of like trails, soft surface trails. We've included a lot of that. We've included, I think, 3 or 4 different projects that go, along creekways that may be implemented. That was something we heard from not only Bike Roswell, but also Rambo, if you're familiar with them, the Roswell Alpharetta Mountain Bike Association. We had several gentlemen come out for our public meetings, had comments on that as well. So we have included their input. And lastly, to that point, we looked at this. You see this little blue line right here? It runs east-west across the north side of Canton Street. This was one of the proposals that Bike Roswell had, one of our stakeholders. It's kind of a on-street bike route that we could do some wayfinding signs. I was recently down in Orlando visiting my brother, and his neighborhood had these. They're little signed routes in Maitland, Florida. They just have they're not even painted bike lanes, but they're identified routes that are used by the residents recreationally. So this was something we thought we could implement east-west to basically connect the Holcomb Bridge area near Warsaw, near the Olive Garden, and come across through these residential streets over to the west side, possibly to link up with the Roswell Area Park or even over towards Lake Charles. But this is just an idea, but we've had a lot of good comments from the bike community.
Thank you. So one other question. What we're approving today would be to move this forward as a aspirational set of goals. Is that correct?
The bike ped plan will be outlining our needs and goals over the next 30 years.
Right. And
Yes.
it's aspirational in its content, right? Because, you know, you're talking about $150 million over that time frame.
We don't have that.
Well, we don't.
Yeah, it'll be aspirational in that sense, yes.
I guess to follow up with that question, what is the plan for prioritizing the projects in bucket one? And what would you propose as the first next steps once the plan is adopted?
So what will we do is we already have some projects teed up. Obviously, the Big Creek Parkway's already committed. It's a funded project. We would start looking at future budget proposals and start incorporating these projects based on their scores and getting your feedback during the budget process each and every year and setting those up, whether we start design work in year one, if there's right-of-way in year two, and then construction in year 3 or 4, we would start teeing these up each and every year based on the scores, and we would likely be attacking tier 1 first and then start setting the stage based on that. And then the other thing is with the sidewalk program, if we implement some of those recommendations, we could start picking off more and more sidewalk gaps throughout our city using these recommendations if they were approved.
I think that's the most interesting part to me is the sidewalk prioritization becomes a little bit more scientific in the way you've developed it. And some of the places like Pine Grove that we've heard a lot of discussion about get moved up quite a bit. Some of the places around Holcomb Bridge and coming across the bridge where there's a lot of foot traffic now get moved up in the process. So from that standpoint, I do like that part. The PED part, I definitely like.
Yeah, the Pine Grove part was very important because in the current system, parts of Pine Grove, especially the further west you get, it does not get a lot of scoring or points as it is today. That's because it's not near schools, it's not near parks, it's not near commercial businesses. If we implement this plan and we add it to that new hub and spoke system, it would definitely receive a little more data help, if you will.
Also, has the plan, I assume it has been presented and discussed thoroughly with the stakeholder group that was involved
Yes, we've had
in giving input, but they have also commented on the final plan.
Yes, we've had 3 stakeholder meetings. We had one in May, another one I think in August or late July, and then again one in October. We've had 10 citizens, and they've had some really good guidance on make sure we're on the right path. Is there anything we're forgetting? And one thing I'm really proud of is they're from all different corners of the city. When they were selected, we got from north part of Roswell, East Roswell, Historic District, et cetera. So we got a lot of great feedback from them. And I want to thank them again for their participation. They volunteered their time to help this study.
So, one point here, you mentioned that when you're going to resurface the road, give you some opportunities to do some light modifications to the road. And this brings me back to something that is a concern for me, which is raising the road and repaving the existing concrete gutters on the side of the road. What is our policy today regarding this, and what will be our policy moving forward regarding repaving on top of existing concrete gutters on the side of the road?
So we do not raise the road anymore. We used to in the past, and we do not pave over gutters anymore. So that's been said, and that's how we have been following for the last couple of years.
Okay, so our policy is not repaving existing concrete gutters on the side of the road.
Yes, and not raise the elevation of the pavement. So we always mill first now and then repave, so the top elevation of the roadway stays the same.
Okay, great, thank you.
Motion to move forward?
Motion to move forward by Councilmember Wilsey, just a second.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Zapata. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Unanimous, thank you. Item number 6, discussion of concepts for the State Route 92 West Crossville Road and Woodstock Road intersection improvement project and the King Road turn lane project. Mr. Ralph.
Thank you, Gary. This item is the couple of intersection improvement projects we talked about at the committee recently. So just a quick background, you approved funds for design a couple of months ago. This is an additional right turn lane on Woodstock to turn on to Highway 92 to go east. And the other one was a right turn lane extension along King Road into Roswell High School. So you see the amounts that you recently approved for the design of these two projects. So for the Woodstock Road concept, and today we just want your blessing for the concepts now so we could continue forward with the design work. So for the Woodstock Road concept, this is, like I said, a northbound right turn lane, and it will include a pedestrian refuge island in that corner where we are adding this right along King Road, and we bring it to the entrance to the Roswell High School. It includes the raised concrete median island along King Road, and the exact location is subject to change, but we are hoping that we could include it somewhere along the proximity of the project. And the current cost estimate is about $720,000, including everything. So here's a little graphic again. North is to the right of the screen, and this is Roswell High School. So this lane currently that you see here, it drops before you get to the senior parking lot, so that creates a lot of traffic issues. And we have shared pictures and videos with you before. So we'll just extend this lane into the parking lot, so that'll help big time with the traffic in the rush hour. And then this is the median island that we were talking about. This is just a raised concrete median island to make the road look a little narrower. So if you like both concepts or just one of the concept, if you could just let us know. Otherwise, we'll just continue to move forward with the design efforts that are already funded. And for the right-of-way and the construction money, we'll be putting those requests into the upcoming budget request cycle earlier next year.
So there's two different projects, right?
Yeah, we are gonna design them separately, so you could pick and choose, or you could do both, you could do one, whatever you wanna do at a later.
So just to make it more clear, is any way that we can divide this into two different projects?
These are two different.
Or there's a reason that what is one item?
Yeah, so, well,
projects? I don't know.
Yes, I'm sorry. So the reason they are just one item is because if you remember initially, we were just looking at the northbound right turn lane along Woodstock. And as we were looking into that, we figured that there is this opportunity to fix another problem, which was the King Road lane extension into the school. So we kind of kept them together, but the way the design money has been approved, as you can see, it's separate numbers for both projects. It's the same consultant, but they're gonna give us two different set of plans. You can choose to construct one or both, or one now and one later. So yeah, and next time we present, we'll have them separate out. And this is not going to the council. We just need kind of your blessing on the concept of this is just a guidance item.
And do you have the funds for both projects, or?
Only for design. For construction and right-of-way, we will ask in the upcoming full cycle budget year.
Okay. And then on the King Road project, I want to understand the operational, not, this one. So what is currently, you will take part, you will narrow the road, the lines to accommodate, I mean, how is today, and what will be the impact of the traffic flow in there, and where is this coming? What is right there? What is the black section? What is right there right now?
Yes, so currently it's 2 lanes here in this section going north, and then this outside lane drops. So everybody has to merge into this one existing lane to go through
Okay.
in front of the Roswell High School, or if they want to enter the Roswell High School, so that creates a lot of traffic problems. School buses, parent drop-off, and the school parking lot traffic, everything has to merge here, and of course the regular morning peak. But if we extend this lane, we'll have to do a little bit of a widening to the school side. We have been talking to the school that, hey, this helps your traffic big time, so please consider donating that right away. We are having those conversations. So we widen towards the school side, and we may need some from this private property or this private property. We just don't know yet. So we'll extend this lane where this just drops into the school parking lot. So this would be a big help during the morning rush hour.
And you have the place in the middle of the
island?
crosswalk, the island.
This
Yep.
one? Yes. Yeah.
So today, anyway, they have to, at some point, they have to merge anyway today.
Yes, here. This is the
before
merging point.
the other entrance, the last
Yeah,
entrance.
way before the school entrance, yes. So we had some pictures in the videos when you approved the design, so that shows that school buses, all the traffic, they have to merge. And the bigger problem was that when people knew that they had to merge, they would just turn from here and stop here. And all this capacity was being wasted. So the traffic backs up into Highway 92, which is not a good scenario. And of course, with the newer drivers, the high school students, we would just want to give them an extra action here. So if you're good with this one, we'll continue with the design phase, which is already funded. And before we do anything else, you will see them again, and we'll make sure they are separated. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you need on that one?
Yes.
Item number 7, consideration of a pedestrian bicycle safety improvement proposal for Steeplechase Drive from the Horseshoe Bend Community Association.
Ralph, thank you, Gary. So I'll have Scott Bruner present this one.
Good morning, everyone. This is a safety proposal that was presented to us by the Horseshoe Bend Community Association for Steeplechase Drive, which is a circular loop road. It's a collector road in the city. The proposal, well, actually right now, the roadway is 40 feet wide, so it's 40 feet of pavement out there and only 2 lanes. So the 2 lanes are 14 feet wide with a 6-foot bike lane right now. So the project is to actually add a buffer between the existing 6-foot shoulder and the travel lanes, narrow the travel lanes down to 11 foot, provide a 3-foot safety buffer, and leave the existing 6 foot there. So the association has proposed to fund 100% of the new pavement markings, and the city would refurbish the existing markings. And speed studies that we've been doing over the years would definitely confirm that there is a speeding issue on Steeplechase Drive. So it really is a combination of speeding and lack of sidewalks. There's no sidewalks on either side along the subject segment. The average 85th percentile speeds are running between 44 and 46 miles per hour on a 35 mile per hour roadway. Almost half the study segments have 85 percentile speeds over 45. And the highest one that we recorded was 53 miles per hour, which pretty much means you have some speeds over 60 miles per hour. So it is a pretty daunting roadway if pedestrians are trying to use the existing shoulder. So this is what it looks like right now with the 14-foot travel lane, 6-foot bike lane. Our proposal is to do a 3-foot minimum buffer, add the striping, and add reflective pavement markers. On the curve sections, we'll actually increase the density of the pavement markers so that it's even more visible in the curves. This is just our draft sign. We would want all the bicyclists and other users to use one way. Pedestrians by law can use both directions, so we're thinking about the final signage, but that's kind of the concept. This is just an overview of the project limits. It's about 90% of the loop of Steeplechase Drive, and the red boxed areas are areas where we've identified vertical and horizontal curves where we do the special treatment. The associations have been working with us for several years now and introduced some information to us back in 2015. And we've asked them to conduct a more recent study. And these are really kind of the three key results of some of the questions on the November study. Question one was, do you feel there is a pedestrian safety issue on Steeplechase Drive? 56.8% of the respondents said yes, 31.7% said no, the ratio of about 1.8 to 1, saying yes. Question two, do you feel the issue is serious enough to warrant some type of speed management or traffic calming treatment? There, 58.7% said yes, 28.6% no. It's about a 2.1 to 1 ratio, indicating yes, there was an issue. Fourth question, basically, do you support moving forward with the buffered shoulder? And 53.1% yes, 39.1% said no. Basically, 40% more respondents said yes than no. So here's just kind of an overall the findings. The community support has grown from some of the last surveys and roughly at 53% now. 40% more residents support the proposal than that oppose it. And if you look at the comments and all the other data, it's clear that 2/3 of the residents believe that there is a safety problem that needs to be addressed one way or the other. We fully support this because it is a way of reducing speeds and according to best practices. And of course, particularly with the lack of sidewalk, the buffered multi-use shoulder is definitely an improvement. There are some trends of run off the road crashes. So the enhanced striping and the reflective pavement markers would actually help with that as well. The financial impact, as said earlier, the community association plans to be 100% responsible for the funding of the new pavement markings, which are estimated to be between $20,000 and $30,000. The city has offered to refurbish the existing markings, which would be about $9,000 to $11,000. Right now, that is not funding that's allocated to us in our current operational budget, but one way or the other, we can have that money by July 1st at least. It is possible we could find other ways before then. So basically what we're asking the committee to do today is basically a two-part motion. The first one is to approve the concept as proposed. And number two, if that is approved, then staff would have to draft an agreement to go to mayor and council, identifying the installation terms and the reimbursement, because we would be receiving funds from the association towards the project. So those are the two items we're seeking a vote on, or any other guidance from the committee. So with that, I'll open it up to questions.
Quick question, you showed the survey from the neighborhood percentage-wise. I didn't see any number of homes participating. Do you have this information? I see 53, 39.
There were an extensive amount of responses. Here's just a list. I believe it was approximately 300 or 400 responses.
300 or 400? We don't know if it's 300 or 400.
Well, I
Somewhere
can get you. It was much more than 100. I believe it was 400, low 400s.
Okay, thanks. It's a good practice always when anybody show percentage-wise numbers to have the base where the sample came from. You know, it's always a good practice to have based on which number of responses or anything, which percentage, because if not, percentage by itself doesn't tell you much if you don't know the size of the participating
Right. Could
group.
be 3 or it could be 300. Yes.
Right. Thanks.
both of my colleagues here, I believe, live in this neighborhood. I've read through the comments, and there's some pretty strong negative comments in the feedback. I can't really put a whole lot of context to it because I don't know who, I don't know the feeling of the area. So it's hard for me to say whether this is a good or a bad thing, other than when I read through the comments, there's pretty strong negatives. I've got page 20 of 62, page packet 205 here. 350 people answered this question, 18 skipped it, so that gives you an idea of what the sample size was. Is this a current, or was this an older one?
There was one in your packet that was from 2015 that had approximately 39%. This is the older one.
That's the older one?
Yes. That's the 2015.
I think just as long as I've lived in the neighborhood, speeding on Steeplechase has been a concern of folks, particularly how it impacts pedestrian safety. And this is an issue that I know the association came to RDOT many years ago, around even before 2015, trying to find a solution and a cost-effective one. And the buffered bike lanes was one that had come forward and has been discussed numerous times. I think one of the issues that we have with the neighborhood is just there is an ideal solution right now, but it's one with a big price tag, and there's not a clear path to get there, and that is with constructing sidewalk or a multi-use path. So I think for the community, it's weighing the cost-effective solution versus one that was maybe more acceptable, but with a higher price tag. And I think if we had a path forward that would help, that the community was able to fund sidewalks, that it might be a way to get a little closer to consensus in the community. I know we've talked about several options of an ordinance that would allow a neighborhood improvement district that will allow the city to help with that. There might also be some options for the community association to look at self-funding. I guess I would just like to have a better understanding of if that is a reasonable near-term solution, and by near-term, I mean, in the next 2 or 3 years, versus doing something like this in the short term. So I think that's a discussion that we need to continue having with RDOT and with the community association and with this council as to whether or not you would support a neighborhood improvement district for neighborhoods to fund sidewalks.
So we're talking about now two different ideas. One is
Correct.
a short term, which is being presented to you today. The other idea is to install sidewalks,
Right.
which could be a long-term fix. So I just want to take a step back maybe, and like Scott said at the beginning of the item, is that RDOT totally supports this idea, because what we have out there, which is 14-foot wide lanes, that's not normal, but we have it. So we have the suggestion, which in staff's mind definitely improves the safety for the pedestrians and the bicycles and helps to control the speeds. So, and we've been working on that with the neighborhood for several years now. So I really don't understand the opposition that's been shown in the comments. I don't know what the main concern is. I have seen them, but I only see positives of implementing something like this. Now, saying that, this is a problem that the city could, take on, but really on the list of priorities when it comes to spending money. It may be low, but if the HOA is willing to pay for it, which they have given us their written consent that yes, they would pay for it, I think it's a pretty good deal for the city, and it's a pretty good opportunity to actually partner with one of the big subdivisions in the city to do something that in my mind, it only has benefits. I don't really see any negatives to this one. So I think this is a great project, and the fact that the HOA is paying for it, that's pretty cool. So staff's opinion is that this is a good opportunity for a partnership to implement something that otherwise staff or city, with city funds, it may take us many, many years to get to this one. So staff's opinion, and that's why I guess we brought it forward, that it's a good project and a good opportunity to partner with the subdivision.
And I think I did see some of the comments probably relate to the fact that they would prefer a more comprehensive solution, which is much more expensive than just this. So it's hard to tell where some of them are coming from.
So just to summarize, is moving the wide strip, existing wide strips, 3
Yeah.
feet, to make it wider, 3 feet, just moving the strips 3 feet.
Yes, so the pavement width stays as is. We'll just be doing striping to make the travel lane narrow from 14 to 11. And then that would leave us 6 foot on both sides. And we'll have a 3-foot stripe buffer between the travel lanes and the multi-use shoulders. And when it started, we were calling it a bike shoulder, but it's a multi-use shoulder. So it is gonna be for pedestrians and cyclists. And the cyclists would still have the opportunity to use the main travel lane if they want to ride fast.
So yeah, we'd like to hear on a public meeting, residents and the HOA president, what their opinion in a public meeting, and then go from there.
So-
The discussion.
We can, but really, this is one of the ones where it's just, it benefits a subdivision. We're talking about a collector, but it serves only a big subdivision. So that's why the city staff, we didn't take on any public involvement process. We just asked the HOA to do it. It's really between the HOA and the residents. If the residents of the neighborhood, they don't want it, we don't want to worry about that.
Well, in a public meeting, we will find out. On a mayor and council public meeting, we will find out, so.
So you mean at the council meeting?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
That
sure.
would be,
Yeah.
I'm sure the president will come and make a point, and then
Yeah.
residents will come and
Sure.
express their opinion and in front of mayor and council, and then mayor and council can make a decision
Sure.
based on those comments from the public.
Okay, so move it forward to a council meeting in hopefully the short-term future.
I actually have a question. The funding, you said, would not be appropriated until July 1st.
Ask for money because you give us money in the existing programs to refresh striping anyway. So whenever it's turned to do Steeplechase Drive, which should be in the next couple of years, we'll do it.
So the project wouldn't happen until that money was actually released.
So the project could happen
happen right
in
away.
a few months after you approve it. So we'll take the HOA's money, implement the project, and all the existing striping could stay as is for now, which is in a reasonable shape now. It's not all gone. So I think we could implement this project in the next few months after you approve it, and then refresh the other striping, the existing striping that stays in the next year or two.
I do know that the HOA has requested a meeting with transportation to discuss this further and also to discuss possible sidewalk funding options. So I would just would like to defer this to a future committee meeting.
Okay.
Discussion, and then move it forward once we have a better understanding of what sidewalk funding options might be available on the shorter term. And maybe we can kind of accelerate a path to that somehow.
Okay, so we'll meet with the HOA and bring it back to a future committee.
Committee, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you need action on this, or is this just discussion?
Well,
We probably need a motion.
So is that a motion, Councilmember Woolsey?
Yes.
To defer to the next transportation committee meeting?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll go ahead and second that.
Say again? Second by Councilmember Keiser. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. Thank you. Where we at? Number 8, consideration for the mayor and or city administrator to sign a contract with an on-call consultant for the design of a pedestrian hybrid beacon, PHB, along State Route 9. Mr. Ralph.
Thank you, Gary. So this is another one of those projects where you have approved and you have given us the funds to do it. We just need to keep moving it forward. And we understand the priority, and we have done everything we could to make this one a priority. So where we are today is, so the proposed site is on Highway 9 between the traffic signals at Norcross and 9 and Magnolia at 9. This would be aligned with where the East Alley pathway, pedestrian path comes out to Highway 9. That's where we want to put it. And so what we have done so far is extensive traffic study. That's what GDOT requires. We counted a couple of Alive and Roswell events and some other pedestrian counts to kind of justify the need. Hey, this is where it needs to be. And we have submitted the permit application to GDOT, and that has very specific requirements, so it takes time to do that. But we have done that. So today we are seeking your approval for a design contract with one of our on-call firms, which is Michael Baker, and in the amount not to exceed $60,000. It'll probably be less than that, but we have a couple of options that we need your guidance that would dictate how much it's going to be, but we still want to expedite and get your approval for the $60,000. So again, this is Magnolia 9, and this is Norcross on the other end. This is where we are talking about. So it's going to be a staggered crosswalk. Still, you can cross in one go, but it's staggered. That's a good safety practice, and that's where it's going to sit. This is the East Alley path. And this is how it's going to look if ideally, this is how we would want to do it, with the mast arm, and it would just fit better with the black paint and all that. But the problem is that any mast arms for any traffic signal, they had to be specifically designed for a specific site, and then you order them. When we hire a contractor, they order them, and the manufacturing and delivery time is about 6 months for these mast arms. So we could continue that route. We could expedite those by ordering the poles. Whenever by the design we know what we need, we can order as we are hiring the contractor to do that. So that'll maybe save us a couple months. But we have another option which doesn't look as good, but it's an option. So on Highway 9, we have an existing hawk at the Vickery Mills Elementary School. So this is on a mast arm. So these are the hawk signals, but they just hang off of a wire with the timber poles. So it doesn't look as good, but this is a much quicker way to do it. Of course, we still need GDOT's approval, but they won't care if it's a mast arm or if it's a span. But this is a quicker way to do it. But we didn't think that this is what we want in front of the city, between City Hall and Canton Street. So we have options. We could just go with this, get it installed sooner and be done with it, or we could start with this and maybe 6 months, 12 months later do an upgrade to mast arms. We could do it either way. So if the goal is to have it, initially we were talking about getting it all done before the first Alive in Roswell in 2020. If we want to do this, it's not going to happen. If we are okay with the span, we have a chance. So we just wanted to kind of get your feedback at the same time as you approve to move forward for the design contract. So between these two options, this could be short-term, temporary, and then long-term this one. So if you want to just give us some guidance on that.
Yeah, I think ideally you want to get to this and as quickly as you can possibly get there. But I think getting this open is more important, is the most important piece. So I'm in favor of you temporarily using the span, but as soon as possible getting to this position.
Good, okay.
Where is the cost difference between this option and the other option?
So these poles and the mast arms are like one of the most expensive piece, and I don't want to say numbers because we don't know, but probably maybe 50 to 75,000 difference, Scott, between the mast arm and the span wire. So about that much. So, but this is, and the point is, if we do the span, we can always reuse these poles anywhere because these are just poles. They're not specifically designed for the location, right? So this will, if we put this in and take this out later in a few months, we'll still get it used we replace poles all the time because they have a life. So we wouldn't be wasting much if we went with this short term and the other option for long term.
So obviously, this is visually less invasive than the other option, visually.
Less invasive?
Like a massive, the other one you see this is like structure, the other one is more discreet. So the only thing, if you can have like a more decorative poles on the next option, on this option you have a nicer decorative poles.
You can always...
So maybe you can find it halfway, nice poles to hold the signs, but then at the same time it's less visual impact. And so the other thing is about I seen different options, like on the pave also they put lights, especially at night. When you press the button, then they will light the pedestrian. So I don't know if it's contemplated and the cost of that, and the impact of that, having on the pave the lights that mark the pedestrian crossing area.
So I guess the first question, yes, we could do better looking like the strain poles, and we could paint them black, so they're not gonna look like this, like just a plain timber pole. We could do that option, and then maybe that could stay in for longer, whatever you guys want. So that's an option. We could do this and make it look a little bit better with black poles. The second option with the in-street, in-pavement lights that you're talking about, yeah, that's an option, but knowing this is the historic district, if you wanted, bright lights and flashy, we could do them. It's just going to cost some more money, but we could do them if that's the direction. We could definitely, Scott, can we make those lights work with the hawk? Same actuation button and make the signal work and those in-pavement lights work?
We'd actually have to check that out, because usually you can't use them for signalized intersections, but a hawk is technically legally a beacon at a signal, so possibly, yeah. But I was also going to say during construction, if you went with just the vertical poles first, we could still do the underground and the foundations for the mast arms. And as soon as the mast arms come in, they could proceed rather than stopping and starting. So that's an option as well.
Yeah.
And what is the benefit of having in-ground lighting? Is there any safety benefit, operational benefit? I see in many cases.
They catch your attention.
So it's another tool for safety.
Yeah, but our proposal to Georgia DOT is that we're going to have three sets of heads on here, so the three sets of flashing reds going to catch your attention pretty well as well, but we can check into that.
Yeah, we will definitely look into both options.
Motion to move forward.
Motion moved forward by Councilmember Tyson.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Zavala. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Item number 9, consideration of GA 400 Holcomb Bridge Road Interchange Express Lane Bridges aesthetics.
So this is just so exciting, I'm just going to stand up. So we've been talking about the bridge aesthetics. So the two bridges we're talking about is the Holcomb Bridge Interchange and the GDOT Express Lane Bridge, which is south of Holcomb Bridge, between Holcomb Bridge and the river. So those are the two bridges we are talking about aesthetics on. So we brought it to the work session on October 30th. We got some guidance. So this is what we have done so far since then. So RDOT worked with the Community Relations Department, Julie and her team, to do this online survey rather than doing a public meeting. And we were able to get 965 responses, which is many, many times more than the number of attendees we normally get at our public meetings. So we asked them 4 questions, so I'm just going to go over these 4 questions really quickly. So the first question was, how important is it for Roswell to invest city funds to aesthetically enhance how the bridges across 400 will look in the future? So the survey kind of included all three bridges. The third bridge is the Big Creek Parkway. So out of the 965 responses, they could only pick one out of these three options in this question. So 45% said very important, 45% said somewhat important, and 10% said the aesthetics are not important for the bridges. The next question that we asked was where or on which parts of the bridges would you like to see aesthetics? And we had these pictures along with the questions on the survey. So on the exterior surfaces of the bridges, meaning the experience as you're driving on 400. That was the first one. So 67% of the 965 people thought that's important. And then on the interior surfaces, meaning the experience as you're driving on those bridges. So 66% of the people thought that's important. And then on the land surrounding the bridges, like the landscape in the corners or the area between the ramps and the main line. So 75% of the people thought that's important. And then 6% of them said, no, none of that is important to them. So the third question was, which of the three bridges over Georgia 400 should have aesthetic upgrades? And again, they could pick all if they wanted. So the Holcomb Ridge interchange, 85% of the people thought that's important. It should have aesthetics. 65% said that Big Creek Parkway should have aesthetics upgrades, and then 50% said the GDOT Express Lane Bridge should have the aesthetic upgrades. And 8% said no aesthetics on any of the bridge. So we asked this straight question, the Alphareta's Encore Parkway Bridge included over 4 million of aesthetic upgrades. So should Roswell make a similar monetary investment in the look of each of these bridges? So here they could only, of course, pick one. So 73% said yes, that kind of monetary investment is worthwhile, and 26% said no, not that much. So we also asked them for their zip code. So any questions on that?
So yeah, for the last question, I want to include over 4 million. So 4 million was the number that
For Encore Parkway.
over 4 million.
Oh, a little bit over 4 million. This is just a number.
So people who wants 4 million.
Yeah.
Over 4 million is 6, 7, 8 is over 4.
Yeah.
So
I guess the
people
question.
think that 4 million was the right amount of money to invest.
I guess the answer really, the question was to give them an idea, and they all know, right, how Encore Parkway looks.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to tell them, hey, something like this costs over 400. So you think it's important for Roswell to make that kind of investment? And it could be 4, it could be 3, it could be 5, something like that.
Just interestingly, though, nobody said nobody checks all three bridges. If you go back.
Yeah, that was one.
Right?
One, we have asked CR that question, how come nobody said all three? Maybe it was a glitch or something in the system.
Okay.
You would think that people are clicking everything else, somebody would say, yeah, all three. We should do something at all three. So the guidance from the October 30th work session from you was to apply the static standards from the Holcomb Bridge Corridor Study and the pattern book to the other bridges, and of course to the 2 new bridges that GDOT is going to construct as part of their express lane project. And there's a typo in the packet. It says 3 bridges being constructed by GDOT. It's not 3. It's just 2, the interchange and the express lane bridge, Big Creek Parkway, we are constructing. That's a typo, sorry about that. And then, so we work with Atkins, who is our T-SPLOS program manager. I have Brian Bullock on that. He's the principal engineer there. So we worked on the estimated costs of all possible aesthetic improvements to make it look like that look from the corridor study, the pattern book. So, and specifically, you're gonna hear the information on which of these improvements you must decide now, and we need to tell that to GDOT by the end of the year. So the must-dos now, if we want certain aesthetics, and other things that could be done and paid for later, we don't have to say GDOT now. So you're gonna see now versus later in the slides that are coming. And again, GDOT has very clearly said any upgrades, any aesthetics you want, city, you pay for them to install whenever, now, later, and of course, the lifelong maintenance, of course, we want to keep that in mind. And then, again, we owe the answer to GDOT by the end of the year for the MOU, so that means we need a decision on the December 9th council meeting. So, this is the slide we created for the end. Just kind of summarize all the costs, but I put an extra copy here. So now we have seen what the public wants, and we know the fact that we have $2 million in the East Blast budget for the bridge aesthetics for both of these bridges. So we know that. So I just wanted to kind of give you the summary before we go into the detail. I have about 50 slides of numbers and options. So before we go there, I wanted to give you a quick summary. So option 1, we don't do any aesthetics, so $0. We can save the $2 million we have in the budget. So that's an option, right? So option 2, looking at all different options, make the bridges look like the pattern book. The minimum, if you want it all, the minimum we need to pay to GDOT now meaning in the next few months, is $2.7 million. So this would enable everything for future, and maybe do some of them now, which have to be done as part of the project. And in the future, the council may decide to do nothing or everything. So it's going to come at a cost, but if you pay the 2.7 now, it enables everything. Option 3, so we pay the 2.7 million now, and then we can also pay the 10.3 million now to implement all the aesthetic upgrades of the pattern book to these two bridges. These numbers are for both bridges. So 2.7 plus 10.3 now, and get it all done as part of the project. But option 4, so we pay the 2.7 million now, enable everything for future. But if we come back and do them later, after the project is done, the cost is not going to be 10.3, it's going to be 15 million. This is just the difference between now and later. And we are talking several years later, because 2027 is the completion year for GDOT. So if we do them after, doing the same things is going to cost us this much more, the difference between 10.3 and 15.
So just before you move on, if I were to pick option 2 right now to get this to GDOT in the required amount of time, between now and 2020 something, I find the money.
So we owe the 2.7 kind of now?
But no, I'm talking about the 10.3.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a long time to go to our citizens and say, here's what we need from you to come up with somewhere between 10 and 15 million for the aesthetics. What kind of drop dead time is there where we have to say, let's go ahead and do these following 20 aesthetics?
So we have, we may be able to negotiate that per the MOU as of today. Whatever we want, we owe the money to GDOT now. But we could but they wouldn't be spending the 10.3 now.
I mean, we don't have 10.3, so that doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, but we can always find. So I guess what I'm saying, when we come back, there's going to be an IGA with GDOT to follow the MOU. We can always negotiate, like for the 15 million, if you remember, for the interchange,
Right.
We are paying that in 6 installments. We can always ask GDOT to get this money in installments as well, and they may agree. But so that's an option. That's a possibility.
Right.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
So, my understanding of how GDOT's going to do this project may be somewhat similar to what they're doing with the Georgia 400 285 interchange, where they struck a design build deal with the contractor, and they have a scope and they have a dollar amount. The Perimeter Community Improvement Districts, which is a client of ours, had wanted to go back and make a modification to one of the ramps. And so GDOT was working with them, and that became a separate negotiation later. So if I understood your correction, your hypothesis, if you said, okay, we'll do the 2.7 now, but sometime in the future we found another, I don't know, $4 million, can we go and add that in? It's possible, but you may find yourself in a situation where, you know, GDOT is kind of getting a price from the contractor, and at that point, that, you know, $5 million may not buy you as much as it would today, because of their contractual relationship. At least that's, if it works out the same, that's what we saw on the Georgia 400, because, you know, there's a nuisance factor. Those guys didn't build it in. They want to keep going, and so on. So I don't know if that helps, but that is another issue.
I guess, Mohammed, where I'm heading here is, number one, I'm not completely sure why they need the 2.7 right now versus negotiating it over a similar time frame as we've done the rest of it. But we don't have $10.3 million at this moment. In a year to 2 years, we might have been able to talk to our citizens and get that. Okay, but right now, I don't know where you'd find it.
So again, this 2.7 is flexible. If you can say for sure we don't want certain things, this 2.7 would go less, the 10.3 would go less. But again, to answer the question, so if we give GDOT the 2.7, that shows the intent that, hey, yes, we want to do it all. So, and we may have the option to negotiate, to work with GDOT, and they have been pretty good to work with, especially on this project, this initiative, which is big. So we may have opportunity. As we find money, we could work with them that, hey, we paid you 2.7 to enable it all. Here is $5 million to do some of that. And that $5 million may not get us everything that we say the 5 could get us today, but depending upon when we are like making the call and giving the money, so there's options.
So basically, the cost increases over time, and just doing the 2.7 million gives us the framework to work with.
Yes.
It's not just the cost of future money as things
Right.
get more expensive.
Right.
It's also the fact that, for example, you're not having to pay for traffic control now because it's built into the big project. But if you come back later, then that has to be built in. So there are elements of constructing something that are already kind of built in that you're not paying for, if that makes sense. So if, for example, you said, we want to paint the beams now, well, we don't have to do traffic control because they're already doing that as part of the construction. But if you wanted to do in the future, it's not just the cost of painting the beams, it's the cost of the traffic control and getting under there and doing it under traffic. So there are complexities of doing some things, not everything, but some things in the future. And I guess the one thing I would add, and it'll become clear in these slides, is the 2.7 million now, that's just saying that if you wanted to keep all your options open, so if you wanted to increase the strength of the structure to be able to handle heavy planters in the future, you would have to do that now.
Right.
But if you came back and said, we don't want planters in the future, then the piece of 2.7 that's in there to cover that goes away, and the 2.7 goes down. So you may look on the slide, it kind of breaks down what's in that 2.7. You may eliminate now, so we don't want that, and that ever.
Right.
So you pull that out, and your 2.7 becomes, 1.7,
Right.
whatever.
So keeping on so two things. One, you mentioned the planter, a great point. So my question would be, is this contemplating maintenance in the future of all these upgrades that, that might be taking consideration?
We have a slide for that in the end.
Okay, and then the second question is, I'm sure you have a design portion that you have to make a definition of which elements are you going to have in your bridge in terms of design, but then you have the other ones that is construction. That I understood construction will be 2027, somewhere there, probably.
Oh, so it ends in 2027.
Okay, so.
We have many years of construction.
Okay, on the bridge is going to take, because I know that they're coming from 285 north with the project. So my question is, when are they going to start, digging into the bridges in Roswell?
So the rail construction is probably gonna start in 2023. So we'll have
Okay.
about 4 years of construction, and in that, they could start
That's
at the
fine.
north.
Okay, so
at the south,
2023, yeah,
or all
for
over.
cash flow purposes, 2023 technically is when GDOT need the money to start building, correct?
So
And then it's gonna take
they-
them 4 years to finish the construction, but
So per the MOU, they asked for the money now, and we agreed. But when they're gonna spend it is later. But remember, starting early 2020, which is in a couple of months, they'd be putting out the bid process. They'll be hiring their contractor or the developer, as they call it. So they need to know what to include in the bid document for that big contractor.
so if I understood correctly, there will be seating, if we choose option number 3, GDOT will be sitting on 10.3 million for 3 years until they start building something here.
And-
That's correct, or if I understand?
Yes, but we have an opportunity to negotiate when we finalize the IGA. We have only executed an MOA with them, and there is supposed to be an IGA following up with that in the next, we heard, 6 months. So at that time, we can always negotiate and ask, we can always request. And since it make a lot of sense, I hope they agree.
It just seems to me that the 2.7 should match the payment schedule that we've already given them.
So, and also, remember all these options and the numbers are for both bridges. We always have the option to just do one of the 2 bridges, right? We don't have to do the express lane bridge. So now, this is the pattern book corridor study from 2013. So the guidance at the work session a couple of weeks ago was to match this. All these numbers, everything is trying to get us to this look. So it has, the railing, the lights, the brick look, and these pavilions, and the landscaping, and the pretty-looking crosswalks here, and then the nice-looking sidewalk. And we have some of that in the corridor, so trying to get to the benches and all that. So we're going to talk about one bridge at a time. So we have 2 bridges. This is the first one, the interchange, and we're going to talk about these 4 cost categories for each bridge, one at a time. So this is, number 1 is the experience from 400. Number 2 is the experience as you are on the bridge. And number 3 is the improvements off the bridge, along the roadway, but off the bridge. And then number 4 is the landscaping, like in the areas between the ramps and the main line and all that. So this is the DDI diverging diamond. This is the room between the 2 bridges for access to the future BRT station. That's what we're talking about. So the number 1, the experience from 400 and improvements that must be included now. So we're looking at, all these components of the bridge. If we want them upgraded, these are the costs, and we gotta do them now. When they build them, they have to do a certain type of form line and all that to make it happen. So, and all these little pieces, they are color coded, so you can reference what we're talking about. So the cost of doing this is this $388,000, and they have some disclaimers that, of course, these are all estimates and there's some contingencies here. So, and if we want to do those, the cost for that now is this. And also, if we want lighting, we want to pay for this conduit. It's a must do if we want lighting. And then, junction boxes, structural upgrade for future betterment. Now, this one feeds into the next element as well, which is the experience on the bridge. So this is a bigger price tag, but this is important because this is not just for the look from 400, this is also for the experience on the bridge. So the total of these for the now bill is $662,000. So if you remember the 2.7 number, that 0.7 is coming, this is that 0.7. So that 662 now, and add the improvements that could be done in the future. We don't have to pay now. So the bridge railing, that's number 1, and then the upgraded street lighting and the painted beams, and these are the numbers that could be done later. But if we do them now, these are the costs. So 2 million total for these improvements, these add-ons. 2 million is the cost if we pay now, but if we pay later, it's 3 million. So that's the cost difference between now and later, 2 million versus 3 million.
Yeah, there's a good example here, and one of the reasons for later, for example, is GDOT will have to put some pedestrian railing on there, and then that will be a quote throwaway versus in the now scenario, you're just paying the delta between the cost of what they would put and what you would put.
And these are like the upcharges, that's a good point. These are all the upcharges on top of GDOT would have paid to do these. So this is kind of just a quick summary, so we could do the 662,000 now, and we can also pay the 2 million to get it all implemented. If not, then we still, if we want these improvements, we still pay 662,000 now, and then later sometime we still gotta pay the 3 million to get it all implemented. So this is the now versus later cost. And this is really the sequence for all the components and elements we were gonna talk about. So if you are good with this, it's gonna go much quicker from this point on, but you would still see a lot of numbers and options. And if there is something that you absolutely don't want, like if you say you don't want the pedestrian lighting ever, so that's the kind of feedback we would want to know, because then we could start eliminating some of these costs and we'll know better numbers.
So, well, that is a good example of the two examples. The one you give the railing, they need to have a railing. So, they will make an investment and then we have to tear and put it back. So that kind of investment makes sense to, if we're going to do it up front. So first we're going to be wasteful and then we don't pay more money. The lighting might be a different story because they can maybe put all the cables underneath.
Yes.
And that's it, stop there, and then
Yeah.
they won't put any lighting there, that then we have to take it out and put it. So I think that there's some elements that for safety reason or operational reason, they have to be there from day one. And these other elements that could be added mainly aesthetically, no operational or safety, that then we can decide later on. So it might be a good idea to define which elements they are for safety and operational, that they have to be there somehow, some level of aesthetic, and which other elements are pure aesthetic that could be taken care of afterward.
Yes.
I don't know,
That's a good point.
I'm suggesting.
So
So we have somewhere between January of 2000 and 2023 to make these trade-offs.
but we gotta kind of tell them what we want.
I get that. I think the citizens have spoken pretty clearly
Yeah.
what they'd like, okay?
Yeah.
And so our challenge is to stay as flexible as we can possibly be, okay? And then go back to our citizens and ask them, now that we're here, how much of this do you really want now that because we're gonna have to pay for it, right? And so we've got to make a decision between now and the December 9th meeting. I don't know that we're going to redesign this whole thing, right? I just think that it's important to keep all the options open. I think it's also important to do the 2.7 over some other, cycle, whether it's the same structure that we're using for the remainder of the money, which makes sense to me, to ask GDOT that. But, I'd just strongly encourage us to keep all the options open. If in 60 days or 90 days, we come up and say, hey, Councilmember Zapata would like to see the railings only put up once, and that's a $2 million project, and we find a way to fund it.
Yeah.
Then in February, we can contact GDOT and say, put this in your initial design. I don't believe they need to know that by January.
With one exception. So we have to, the city has to let GDOT know what they want. But it's also incumbent upon the city, and Mohammed and his team have asked us to help do this, is that we also have to create the specifications that they're going to insert in their plans. So when they put this out to bid, the contractor, we have to specify exactly what this looks like so you get back what you want, right?
Right.
So, and there are some time constraints that, in a couple of months, we've got to have certain things done. So it might be one of those things. Now, we can move forward with, developing specs for everything, and if you don't want it, you just don't include it. So just to be aware of that. And I guess I would add one other thing is, can you go back to the improvements that must be included now, the kind of bridge structure piece? The one that showed the image with all the elements of the bridge? That one. So for example, I would just encourage you to think, if you look at, say, the gray, the walls underneath, so that's an almost $200,000 improvement. If you look at this and say, we really don't want anything except from the beams up, then go ahead and just eliminate that. Now, you may want it. I'm not telling you what you should do it or not. I think in one of the presentations, we gave examples where Encore, they decorated everything top and bottom, right? But then up in Cobb County on Span and some of those other bridges, it was from structure up. So I would just say, when we talk about keeping all of your options open, that's certainly fine. But if you know that you don't want that, eliminate it and don't include that in your numbers. If you want it, that's great. Just, I would encourage you to think about the aesthetics and what is and isn't important to you as it relates to the cost for that.
So yeah, that's a good point. That minimum 2.7, the bill we gotta pay now, it doesn't have to be 2.7. If you eliminate certain things forever, then that could come down. So number second, the experience from the bridge. When you're driving on the bridge or walking on the bridge, here are some of the options. So the improvements that must be included now are some conduit for lighting and pull boxes, and the cost for that is $40,000. And then remember in the first part where we already had the structural upgrade, so that feeds into this one now here. So we have a lot of these options that we could pay later for, so like the street lighting, the specialty wall lights, specialty sidewalk, raised planters and all that. So we have the numbers for those. So if we wanted it all done as part of their project, we could pay the 40 plus the $618,000. So the total $658,000 now. But if we want to do it later, we want to pay for it later, the cost goes up to $965,000 from the $618,000. So here's a quick summary, that 40 plus 618 now, or 40 now and $965,000 later. So the third element is the streetscape improvements off the bridge. So you kind of see the blue highlights. So those are not at the bridge, along the bridge. They could all be implemented in the future. There's nothing we have to do now. So these are the numbers: landscaping, paving, upgraded mast arms, side furnishing like benches and stuff and haunts, sidewalk, the pavilions that we showed earlier. So these are all the costs for those. So the bill is $2.6 million if we pay for it now versus $4.4 million later. So it's this is now adding to the difference between the 10.3 and the 15. So that's where that's coming from. So now the fourth and last element for this bridge is and again, these are all everything that could be done in the future. We don't have to declare or pay for it now. So these are the landscaping in the areas between the ramps and the main line, and then any gateway monuments, any public art we want in any of those corners. So these are the 8 possible locations where we could do, but the cost is assuming 4 of each, of like 4 monuments, 4 public art, and these are the costs. So if we pay for them now, it's $2.8 million. But if we,
it's about the same. It's the same, really same cost now or in the future for that kind of stuff. I think one of the questions we'll have to ask is, I recall in the MOU, I don't remember the exact language, but there was some language about that GDOT would consider upgrades for things that they're planning to do. So we have to make sure whether GDOT will even do some of these things now. They're going to be working in those areas and grassing, so it would make some sense. But I would just put an asterisk that we need to make sure that GDOT might say, well, that's just beyond anything we would do, so we're not going to fool with that issue. They might. But in this instance, it doesn't really matter that much for you because, you know, it might be convenience because GDOT would then oversee it versus city staff have to do it. The flip side of that is as we went through that kind of workshop scenario that we had, and we had some citizens come in, the whole concept of a kind of a master plan, you know, for the gateway to try to figure some of these things out was discussed. And my 2 cents worth, you can take it for 2 cents, is that, you know, a master plan to have the time to put some thought and some thoughtful creativity to this area, since it's not going to be, you know, more or less now or in the future, it's probably worth that. You're probably going to want public involvement. You're probably going to want thoughts about where would we want to put public art if we want to put it, and do we want to, you know, build paths for future art, or art can be changed out. So I would just throw that in there in your consideration of when you look at this particular piece of it as it relates to the structure that's you got to make a decision on.
So
That's a good point. Thanks, Brian.
you know, point like, I don't know if it's a way to determine the relevant, because, you know, a bench on top of 400, how many people, can we determine how many people will sit there on top of 400 to watch the cars go by or hear the noise underneath? Or public art that is very hard to access to take a selfie with the public art there? Or how many people will walk right next to 400 to take a selfie with the public art? I mean, there's some things that, according with experience and practicality, that we can take into consideration, because those are nice things, but if you think, is this practical, how much is going to be used, is the best way to invest the money. So I don't know if it's a way to rank all these beautiful things that we would like to have on top of 400 or on the side of 400, but really, is this a good investment? Is this really something that the public will use and a lot or not? So I don't know if it's a way to.
Mohammed, do we have time to do a workshop on this?
So yeah, you know, I clearly thought this was worthy of another work session, but we didn't have time because we need the decision on December 9th. So if there is a time to do a work session between now and December 9th.
I mean, I feel like we're just scratching the surface on these questions. We're getting on to 11 o'clock.
Yep.
Do we have time between now and the 9th to schedule a work session?
We'll have to look up everybody's schedules.
It's just not, it's not clear to me that we need to be designing all this stuff before December 9th.
Yeah.
And if you look at the only decisions we really, really have to make, it's not that many.
It's
So
not, I agree.
if you can, and this is, by the way, this is great that it's all spelled out like this for us, because you can take your pencil and
Yes.
cross out, right? I think what we need to do.
You guys feel like you can get there today?
No, what I'm telling you is doing a workshop that's completely open on the whole design of everything, we'll never get there. But if what we're doing is deciding what we need to do inside that 2.7 million, we can probably get there with that.
Yeah, go back to the three options.
Today. Today?
So, the do nothing,
This, oh, the
2.7 plus later, and so if the decision has to be made on this,
Yeah.
then you obviously the option number one, no problem. Option number two, yeah, I mean, you can go more light, but option number 3 and 4, you have to dig into more details because you are committing to 10.3 or $15 million based on the elements that the bridge will have aesthetically. So if it's option number 1, can be decided in a time right now. Option number 2 will be easier, but if we're getting to option number 3 and 4, then definitely need more discussion because it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to explore what are the options for raising that 10.3 million. I mean, is it through, you know, where does it come from? I mean, is there a possibility of doing an improvement district? Is there, you know, bonds? I mean, you know, where does that money come from? And I think that's.
So, yeah, I mean, that could be a discussion we could do in the next couple of months, I guess. But if based on the public input and based on whatever you desire, whichever option you pick, we got to decide, then we yes, figure out a way to find the money for that.
Look, we don't have $10.3 million.
Right.
So to me, if you want to have a work session to decide how much of the 2.7 do you want to spend in the initial construction, I can see doing that, okay? But having a whole discussion about the final design, I think is not something, I think that's going to get in the way of the decision you need by December 9th.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I would agree with that too. I think really there's one decision to make now that we can make between now and December 9th, and that's option 2. Correct.
The logical thing to do in my mind, based on the public input and the funds we already have, which is 2 million, and it's pretty close to the 2.7 million. So we don't leave anything off. We kind of continue with everything still on the board, and then yes, there's going to be a lot of work in the next few months to kind of define, and then of course finding the money is going to be a bigger deal for you guys.
And what the 2.7 million will tell GDOT?
That we want to enable everything for future for both bridges. That's the 2.7 million.
I would preface it 2.7 million or less.
Yes.
If
or
on that
less.
2.7 point list, you say, we're not ever going to do that. Now it's 2.5 million.
2.5 or 2.0 or whatever, right?
Right. So that, if that's something you can do now, then that's certainly a worthwhile exercise. So
Which will have an impact on the 10.3. The more you retool or specify the 2.7 or less is how much you have to invest out of the 10.3.
yes, with exception that, so for example, in that 2.7, if you say, I don't want to do the walls, which was, I think, is around 200,000, it doesn't affect the 10.3 as to what would be in the future. But if you said, I don't want to upgrade the structure to handle future, streetscape improvements, well, some of those costs are in that 10.3. So if you're not going to allow for them now, then they go away in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So some hit both and some only hit one.
Okay. Thank you.
So this was the first bridge, and now we can go to the second bridge. This is the Express Lane Bridge. Again, same 4 cost categories. So you have seen this slide before in the work session, that this is the upgrade walls, and if you don't upgrade, then this is what we get, the standard stuff. So again, as view from 400 for the Express Lane Bridge, these are some of the basic things we got. A must be included now. So the total is 1.2 million for these on the Express Lane Bridge, because it has these big walls as you're going up on the ramp of the Express Lane, which is only south facing. So on your left, you would see these huge triangular shaped walls going up the ramps. And then, so again, this 1.2, if you want to do all of that now, plus the conduit, pull boxes and stuff, and the extended bridge deck for a 10-foot multi-use trail, that's a big cost. But remember, GDOT is only going to do a 5-foot sidewalk on one side of the Express Lane Bridge. If we want a 10-foot wide trail with planters separating the traffic and the trail, we got to extend the bridge deck, and of course we got to pay for that. So this is the 840 just for that. So that's a pay now bill if that's what we want to do. So that's 2 million. That's the other 2 million of the 2.7, by the way, the now bill. And so this is the same 2 million. So stuff that could be done in the future. So the railing and then the painted beam, that's an additional $1 million. So the 2 plus 1, that's a $3 million bill now. But if we do that $1 million stuff later, it's 1.5. So the same repeat of the future costs are higher. The streetscape improvements, the second element, experience on the bridge. Now remember, if we pay for that extended bridge deck, then all of this applies. We could do all of this. $25,000 for the pull boxes for the lighting. And then the stuff that could be done in the future, but it has to be enabled now with that additional cost with the bridge deck. So all of that with the cost number, so $381,000 to do all of this on the bridge if we paid the base $2 million to enable it for future. And the now cost is $381,000, the future cost is $406,000. And again, this is the same summary, the same way we have seen before. So the next element is the improvements off the bridge. So this is like the approach roads coming from Old Alabama, coming from Grimes Bridge. So nothing has to be done now. But all of this could be done in the future with this cost. So the cost of that is $700,000 now if it gets done, but almost 1.4, well, over 1.4 for later. And the landscaping that's in the ramps off the main traffic areas. So again, these are the monuments and the gateway monuments and the public art and the landscaping. So 180,000 for those two. So this is the summary of this bridge. So the base must pay bill now, if we want it all, is $2 million. If we pay for the whole thing is 2.3. If you pay for it now, an additional 2.3. But if we pay for it later, it's almost 4 million. So 2 plus 2 now or plus 4 later. So, and the maintenance-wise, the bridge components for the Holcomb Bridge Road, it's 75,000 every 5 year. And then for the GDOT bridge, it's 175,000 every 5 years. But then the plantings, that's where the higher maintenance comes into play. It's 150 a year for the Holcomb Bridge, and then 120 a year for the express lanes, because of course all those bridges or interchanges in Alpharetta, they take about that much, and they partner with the CAD to pay for that yearly bill. So it comes at a cost. And so the financial impact, we said we have $2 million in the T-Splosh money already for these two bridges. Big Creek Parkway, we'll come back with a separate discussion how to match that to the pattern book look. It has a different look now, and it has 2.5 in that account set aside for that. So we'll come back early next year if you want to match the Big Creek Parkway look to the pattern book as well. So we want to bring this to the whatever you agree on today. We want to bring that to the December 9th council meeting so we could give an answer to GDOT before the end of the year.
So if my colleagues would agree, here's what I would propose. I think we need to get something onto the December 9th agenda. And to do that, I could see moving forward option 2 with the following changes to it. Option 2 at 2.7 or less, paid over the same schedule as our other payments. And in between now and December 9th, if we want to schedule a work session to work on the 2.7 to determine whether it's 2.0 or 2.3 or whatever, then I think that would be valuable also. And then that information can be used at our December 9th meeting.
Is that a motion? I would recommend that be a motion. Thank you. Motion is made and seconded by Councilmember Wilsey. Any further discussion, questions?
Oh, we're good.
Okay. All in favor, please raise your hands. It's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to administration, item number 11, consideration of a contract for professional services for the planning phase 2 of the City of Roswell strategic plan. As I hope everybody's aware, we finished up phase 1 of that strategic plan, which was the community engagement phase this last Thursday at our community summit. We are now moving into phase 2 without much of a breath. So this contract, we went out for RFQs, RFPs back in the fall. We received a good response from qualified firms. The evaluation team scored all the proposals. And I'm going to read a little bit from the memo just to get it in the record so everybody watching can understand what this is all about. So this past fall, we published an RFQ for the second phase of the development of our strategic plan, which is the planning phase. Planning phase consists of working closely with the departmental teams and the city council to digest what we heard through phase 1, the community engagement phase, facilitate meetings with and between the city executive team and the city council to determine the vision, the values, goals, and objectives for the strategic plan, memorialize that vision, values, goals, and objectives, and then work with the city teams to develop performance measures and an implementation plan for the strategic plan, and then propose and present a draft final plan for our adoption. So the evaluation team, which consisted of me, Lenore Bromberg, and Alice Wakefield, reviewed all the proposals, and Management Partners Incorporated was the clear choice for this project for the City of Roswell. Management Partners meets or exceeds all the areas outlined in the RFP. Management Partners is teaming up with Planning Next, who is our Phase 1 consultant, which will ensure the seamless transition between the two phases and will maintain the connection to our community through Phase 2. Management Partners has outstanding references from other cities and my city management colleagues. Management Partners is familiar with the city, and we have successfully conducted business in the past with them. If you recall, they did my evaluation. That was Bob Oselli. He's with Management Partners. So the recommendation is the evaluation team recommends a city contract with Management Partners Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $94,500 for Phase 2 of the strategic plan. And I will answer any questions you have. Motion before by Councilmember Tizer. Second by Councilmember Wilsey. Any questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Unanimous, thank you. And the last item, item number 12, under Recreation and Parks, consideration of a resolution authorizing the Department of Recreation, Historic and Cultural Affairs in collaboration with the Roswell Arts Fund to apply for the Bloomberg Philanthropies Asphalt Art Initiative Grant.
Thank you, sir. And I also have Gila Sanders here as our new Executive Director for the Art Fund as part of this presentation, and we'll be brief. We had an opportunity to apply for an implementation program of our Art Master Plan through Bloomberg Philanthropies. And this is a grant project that is awarded to 10 cities throughout the United States. We do qualify as the city in size as far as their target market of 30,000 to 500,000 people that live in the city. It's a fairly compressed time frame in our collaboration on this, which is why we're bringing it to you today. We need to get it scheduled on your next December agenda so that we can have it authorized. The application is actually due on the 12th. And so we're working with Danny and his team in our grants division to complete the application along with Gila and her team with the Arts Fund to put it together, assuming that it moves forward today for authorization to apply. The matching for this can be in kind. We are already scheduled, and the project that's envisioned is an art project down at Riverside Park and decorating and enhancing some of our pedestrian crosswalks with art. And Gila can kind of go into some more details if you're interested on the exact implementation of that project. We're already scheduled through our authorized budget this year to resurface the parking lot, so it's good timing to apply for this grant, as if we are awarded, we'd be able to implement the actual art project in the spring after we do the resurfacing and resealing of the asphalt in the park already.
I'd like to thank you for bringing this grant opportunity forward, and I greatly appreciate your creativity and partnership with Parks and Rec and bringing this forward. So I can't think of a reason not to move to approve, and wish you best of luck in the grant process.
Quick question, any of the matches would be taxpayers' money?
It would be in kind, and so we are already funding.
What do you mean by in kind? Sorry.
So it doesn't necessarily, there isn't a direct match dollar for dollar in this grant, but you can use in-kind services, so whether it be project management or already constructed infrastructure. So we are already planning to reseal the parking lots, so that would be done with taxpayer money, and that could qualify as in-kind services related to the project. So yes.
So, but they won't require, you said you're already resurfacing, or won't require more money than already normal resurfacing
Correct.
cost, right?
Correct.
So the permits would also be considered as in kind. Oh, that permits, city permits for, any kind of improvement would also be considered in kind.
Any further questions or comments? Councilmember Wilsey, was that a motion?
Yes,
Okay.
motion to approve.
Motion to approve, is there a second? Second. Tizer, any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. And if you don't know, this is Ms. Gila Sanders. She's the new Executive Director for the Art Fund.
Yes, hello, everybody.
Thank you, welcome. And we are adjourned.
One more item on what?